Chapter 931 Concrete. What a grand spectacle! On the periphery of the Ionian Sea, at the center of Navarin Island, billows of black smoke rise. Waves of heat ascend. Below the crater in the center of the island, scorching magma churns within the mountain's belly, while molten lava, meant to settle, continuously springs forth from the heart of the earth. And the salt traces left behind by the passing seawater climb the mountain path, stripping away vegetation in their wake. Only a sparse few remain in their original form, but all these traces come to a halt near the crater. Under the influence of Poseidon's uncontrollable law, the island, once submerged by the ocean, drew forth waves hundreds of meters high. The violent tides swept away all creatures on the island, and the backflow of the sea was supposed to further trigger a violent volcanic eruption, enveloping the surrounding 100 miles of sea under dark clouds, and even causing the entire island to sink below the surface. But fatefully, as a vassal of the Sea Emperor, the former imperial capital of the Kingdom of Pylos, though Poseidon has long been absent, his lingering protection never vanished. One of Olympus's principal gods, and once a guest on the island of Lemnos, the god of craftsmanship Hephaestus, blessed this island. After the Lord of Fire visited, his authority ensured it would never suffer due to the lava. Thus, Navarin Island was preserved, even though the magma once reached the mountain's peak. Although the nation built atop was inevitably doomed to collapse, the island itself stubbornly survived. Therefore, to await the arrival of the fates, Lane simply stayed above the sea. After all, it was about time for the other party to arrive. The Elder Wand revealed Lane's tracks, but this scrutiny also allowed him to sense it in advance. What surprised Lane, however, was not only the arrival of Lachesis, the second sister of the three fates, measuring life with a stone ruler marked with fates, but also an additional guest. The grand sorceress who pioneered alchemy, Hermes. What took him even more by surprise was that this time, without needing to make a move himself, when Lachesis stepped out of the cloud chariot, the other party struck first. Your efforts are futile, Mr. Avon. With the power of your constructs, it is impossible to imprison the agent of fate. His voice was calm, not in a hurry to do something. Quietly watching every move of Hermes, Lane never intended to act against the three fates for control of their godhood. As long as they could be prevented from intervening in the material world before the change of the era, his purpose would be achieved. So, when noticing Hermes's bold move, Lane not only didn't stop him but even hoped he would succeed directly. Initially, the great alchemist did not disappoint him. Whether it was the trajectory of fate closely connected to Lachesis or the seemingly broken portal, yet filled with infinite mysteries, it all brightened Lane's eyes. Especially the latter, aside from those things found in the Nine Realms ruins, this was his first encounter with alchemy constructs that touched the domain of deity. If his constructs were complete, then perhaps Hermes might truly have managed to imprison the fates here. And even though the damaged gateway was full of gaps, it was only incapable of restraining Lachesis alone. If it were another true god with weak divine power, the outcome might have been quite different. Thus, quietly putting away 2 Yggdrasil leaves he had prepared earlier, Lane decided to approach the problem in a different way. The fates were significant, but whether they ended up in his hands or not suddenly seemed less critical. Especially when compared to the alchemy achievements shown by Hermes, Lachesis's value once again declined considerably. Therefore, Lane started brewing a pot of tea in front of him. Watching the great alchemist caught in a stalemate in the sky, he began to speak as a reminder. And on the side of the cloud car, Hermes seemed to hear his voice. Swoosh! His figure flashed, descending from the sky. Clad in a robe embroidered with golden threads, his broad sleeves fluttering. In a moment, as his feet touched the ground, the youthful Hermes had already sorted out his emotions. His serious expression had vanished, and stepping forward unhurriedly, the great alchemist's face bore a friendly smile. Right hand holding the gate of starlight, as if he only just noticed Lane's presence, Hermes warmly greeted. Just now I was wondering who was calling me. It's truly unexpected to meet a friend of the king here. Sir, you must have heard of me, after all. I do have a certain reputation in Athens. But today is our first official meeting, so I should introduce myself, Hermes, the spellcaster under contract with the royal family of Athens, and of course, the world's first true alchemist. As you see, Avon, Andrea's counselor, just your average godhood practitioner. Smiling, Lane introduced himself as well. Ha 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 ha. Now we're officially acquainted. In that case, I won't hold back. Laughing heartily, winking, with no hint of reservation, Hermes cheerfully said, "Like you reminded, Mr. Avon, I have indeed encountered a little trouble. If you could lend me a hand, I'd be immensely grateful." "Of course, no problem." Unsurprised by Hermes's familiarity, Lane replied with a smile. Chapter 932 Concrete_2. However, Mr. Hermes, before that, we need to confirm one thing. What issue? That is, regarding this guest from Mount Nyssa, just to what extent can you intervene? There was no direct inquiry, but the two conversing knew well without saying. From Lane's perspective, the reason Hermes appeared here with Lachesis was most likely because she had originally sought his help. Yet, for some reason, the great alchemist had abandoned such actions and instead took initiative on his own. From Hermes's perspective, the reason for his intervention here and now was also due to Lachesis's enemy being present. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Should anything go awry, it's good to have a contingency plan. Indeed, it turned out to be true. When the Gate of Starlight could not halt the poison of fate, Hermes received a timely reminder. He was aware of the reason for his presence, and so probably was the other party. Moreover, he knew that the other party knew, and the other party was aware that he knew they knew. In such a situation, Hermes was quite clear it was time to demonstrate an attitude that was sufficiently resolute. This was the helplessness of insufficient power. Despite doing nothing, one must choose sides between the fates and the primordial gods, but since a choice was inevitable, Hermes naturally would choose a more reliable side. So, the best thing to bind fate is fate itself, and the most suitable chains to imprison her are the powers of fate itself. Mr. Avon, of course I'm aware of this, but if I could obtain her power, I wouldn't have had to worry about this at all. Hermes expressed his deep-seated hatred towards the fates, but in reality, although Hermes and Lachesis did not harbor any significant grudges. As a transmigrator from the fantasy world, he never expected to get along harmoniously with the fates. Moreover, given their unintelligible behavior, he had to consider, if the problem could not be resolved, then the one causing the issues must be dealt with now. However, faced with Lane's suggestion, Hermes only felt disappointment. If this was all, these were things he had known for a long time. "Are you certain? I think you should reconsider. There must be something closely associated with her on you." Lane said affirmatively after taking a sip of tea. Hermes furrowed his brows, falling silent for a moment. To say there was such a thing, indeed there was, but it was neither a weapon, nor did it possess the power to bind. Previously, in an effort to weaken Lachesis's power, Hermes had attempted to borrow the stone ruler, which the goddess had transformed into a staff, in the tower. Unexpectedly, after a moment of hesitation, Lachesis actually lent it to him. So casual, so unthinking, that Hermes even suspected it to be a forgery for a while. Later, the divine artifact's indestructible nature confirmed its authenticity, forcing the great alchemist to accept this outcome. But aside from Lachesis's surprising behavior, the divine artifact itself was of no use to Hermes. After all, the stone ruler measuring fate was not Atropus's scissors that cut through fate. The fate it symbolized was its representation in certain aspects of time and space. Even with the owner's permission, Hermes could at best use it to measure the length of life, the breadth of an individual's lifetime, and glance into past and future, yet it could not harm any creature. Moreover, although Lachesis had handed the divine artifact to Hermes, her subjective will did not grant him the qualifications to use the divine artifact. If there is anything at all, it would only be that. Taking out the stone ruler and placing it in front of him, Hermes pushed it forward. Seeing this renowned divine artifact, Lane nodded slightly. Indeed, it was that. Although it was unclear why Lachesis would let her accompanying divine artifact leave her side, the fact remained. without incurring a hefty price. Just a little clever maneuvering was needed. It can become something else in Hermes's hands, and with this opportunity, I could also see what exactly that portal made of starlight is. It's this, the medium that connects the two of you. Although I don't know why you can establish a connection with it, it does indeed exist. As for its function, his gaze shifted as Lane looked towards the wobbly portal. Droplets of dark water trickled down, turning into mist just before they hit the ground, wrapping themselves back into the starlight. If anyone dared to touch it, the toxic tumor of fate would cling to them like gangrene on bones. And if no one touched it, it would persist eternally, unceasingly. Of course, Lane could withstand such a degree of poison. It was the consequence of his actions, and naturally, he had the capacity to bear it. The bearer of the broken gate. There was no need for detailed explanations. Hermes understood Lane's meaning. His gate was still a falsehood, an existence in conceptual form only before the process of turning the fake into real is genuinely begun. Without material existence as support, it cannot sustain itself independently of Hermes. But if it were given a support, a tangible material as a foundation stone, perhaps it could continue to exist. It might turn into a sword, a sheet of paper, an Ouroboros, or even a clump of clouds. What it ultimately becomes depends solely on the concept of the one supporting its continuation. And its original concept might be diluted in this process. Pondering silently, this method had its pros and cons. Others may not understand, but as the creator of the Gate of Truth, Hermes himself knew well that concepts were not to be trifled with. Despite him having created a flawed portal effortlessly, this did not mean he could create a second or a third one. On the contrary, only when the first one collapses because it cannot maintain itself could he create a second identical creation in the same way. The concept of uniqueness. Simple replicas don't work. Once used, there would be no second. And to turn a fake into a true gate of truth, to manifest the gate from nothingness into reality, one must ensure its conceptual integrity, not carelessly breaking its wholeness. In such a case, once this flawed creation is used to make something else, even if one later has the ability to make the final step, one must incorporate this thing into the Gate of Truth. It was for this reason that Hermes hesitated. Is it necessary? He wasn't sure. But Hermes speculated that the godhood practitioner marked by Lachesis could definitely have other methods to suppress the fates, just like he had imprisoned Atropos. The opponent was an enemy, who would have countermeasures even without himself. Thus, how to handle this event ultimately fell on him. Perhaps I should refuse. But since I have already been tainted by the power of fate, do I truly wish to let go? I can't shake it, let alone use it to support my creation. Its true master isn't me, and Lachesis didn't hand it over to me in the name of a divine artifact. The great alchemist shook his head slightly, raising the issue. However, from the words, it was not clear where his inclinations lay. And looking at the wavering Hermes, Lane simply stretched out his hand and swiped in front of him. It's all right, I have a way. In the next moment, a leaf as exquisite as jade appeared there, radiating wisdom and vitality to its surroundings. Chapter 933 Records. What is this? The crystal-clear leaf shimmered under the sunlight, radiating waves of emerald twinkles. Just being bathed in this light, Hermes felt a rush of vibrant life force surge through his heart. Leaves of the golden apple tree? Impossible. Although Hermes had not seen a golden apple in this real world, he had seen the Mother Earth's divine tree more than once in the original fantasy world. It was the ancestor of all plants begotten by chaos, its power truly extraordinary. Yet the vitality exhibited by the golden apple tree paled in comparison to what lay before him now. This was not just a quantitative difference, but a qualitative one. This is the Notahil leaf. Mr. Hermes, of course, you haven't seen it, because it doesn't belong to the mortal realm. The great serpent of the central court implanted the divine tree that spans the 9 hells into soil laden with sin. It purified the chaotic and defiled blood and ultimately blossomed flowers brimming with wisdom. And this, the leaf of the divine tree, it carries the strength of my Lord. With its aid, Even the divine artifact of the fates is not so indestructible. He had been smiling a moment ago, but his expression turned devout and fervent in the next. Aside from making minor modifications to the origin of the leaf, Lane acted like a true believer. Of course, strictly speaking, he hadn't deceived anyone, as the divine tree Notahil truly was a derivative of the strength of Yggdrasil. From a botanical standpoint, it was all right to consider them the same. And at this moment within this leaf was one of the serpent of the central court's demon fires capable of annihilating everything. The power of the flame originated from the shattered Muspelheim, its vessel a wisp of the undying bright flame from Odin's treasury. As a relic of the old world that persisted into the new, it innately contained a hint of the concept of destruction and rebirth. The serpent of the central court then integrated them with its own strength, eventually bestowing it with the might to burn the heavens. Hermes might not have known its origins, but when Lane gently stirred the leaf, strands of aura began to diffuse from it. Clearly, the already unstable gate of starlight began to shake violently. Even the falling black droplets seemed to slow by a fraction. Mr. Avon, please allow me to offer my utmost respect to the great serpent of the central court, but forgive my boldness. As a spellcaster, I do not mean to offer devotion to that deity. Barely maintaining his composure, a storm of emotions churned within Hermes. He was somewhat aware of the existence of the serpent of the central court. Over the centuries, great alchemists had encountered certain beings claiming to be demons, and out of curiosity and a desire for exploration, he had cautiously interacted with them. They were transcendent beings by nature, their veins coursing with darkness and sin. What shocked Hermes at that time was these demons claiming they came from a world called Hell, distinct from the mortal realm of chaos. There existed two beings as powerful as the god-king of the current world. The great alchemist had his doubts, but the unrest in the underworld a decade ago undoubtedly confirmed the content of those demons' words. However, unlike others, Hermes had a different view of that war. Perhaps because he had once traveled between the realms of reality and fantasy, he had quite a few insights into the workings of interface powers. Zeus had been at a disadvantage in that clash, but this didn't necessarily imply a true disparity in strength between them. If it were under the aegis of powers of the current world, perhaps the outcome of their struggle might be reversed. However, at this moment, looking at the leaf before him, Hermes instantly overturned his past suspicions. If this were some kind of divine artifact, it wouldn't prove anything. But a leaf brimming with the essence of life must stem from a divine tree of equivalent strength. Feeling that grand and profound force, cold sweat trickled down Hermes' back. Great divine power, he had witnessed it before. But a divine tree at the level of great divine power, he truly saw for the first time. And such a divine tree existing unnoticed was beyond Hermes' wildest imaginations. At this moment, he felt he had really come to the wrong place. Cough, cough, Mr. Avon. I just remembered, in fact, I do have a way to solve my own little problem. Taking a cautious step back, Hermes cautiously explained. He wanted to resolve the trouble brought upon him by the fates, but that did not include putting himself into even greater trouble. While harboring thoughts of retreat, the great alchemist tried to leave. However, at the moment he stepped back, the jade-like leaf likewise moved forward a step, still floating steadily in front of Hermes. It's fine, Mr. Hermes. The great serpent of the central court is the Lord of Hell. Although it also possesses countless believers, where incomprehensible numbers of lives worship its existence, it cares more about a person's ability than faith. Indeed, even without uttering a single prayer, as long as one can perfectly execute my Lord's will, they are the saints blessed by its will. His smile remained, seemingly unaware of Hermes' retreat. Lane opened his hands, warmly facing this exceptionally gifted great alchemist. It must be said that often the assessments of later generations are credible, and the legends about Hermes certainly do not fall short of those about Zeus. Mr. Hermes, no need to demur. Perhaps you have a very good solution, but since you have my lord's assistance, why bother yourself? In fact, The great serpent of the central court has long taken notice of your extraordinary talents. Now that you have come to seek it out personally, how is this not a link of destiny? A connection of destiny? What nonsensical connection? I have a fate suppressed in my own hands now, you suppressed a fate in the past, and who knows, maybe a third one is bound to fall by your hand in the future. And now you talk to me about the connections of destiny. What kind of divine era joke is this? However ridiculous as he found the reasoning, at this very moment, Hermes could not bring himself to utter a word of refusal. As a believer in a god, even though the person before him declared that the serpent of the central court did not care about faith, Hermes wouldn't really dare believe it. After all, it was impossible for the other party to falsify the deity he believed in. Thus, when Lane said he had long been observed by the ancient serpent of the central court, it was probably a true occurrence. Damn it, a great divine power, one not even of the mortal realm. How did it come to notice him, a mere little spellcaster dwelling in Athens? Hermes couldn't understand, but he had to accept the reality. Because right before his eyes, that dazzling divine leaf was radiating a blinding brilliance. The aura it released became clearer and clearer. This was an invitation as well as a threat. If Hermes accepted, then this would be a meeting gift from the Lord of Hell to him. But if he declined, then perhaps it would become the punishment that destroys him. No one can refuse the personal attention of the great, not even the most capable mortals. It was the case with Pandora before Gaia, and now Hermes is in the same position. Since it is so, then there could be nothing better. I thank the great Lord of Hell for valuing me, and I will definitely not fail his assistance to me in the future. Taking a deep breath, his smile somewhat forced, Hermes accepted the Yggdrasil leaf. The situation being what it is, regret is already useless. Perhaps from the day he arrived here from the fantasy world, it was destined that he would face these troubles. The fates, God King Zeus, or some other existence. And that deity of world ending who shattered the fantasy world and showed him a glimpse of alchemy. Grasping the divine leaf, looking at the figure before him, Hermes suppressed the urge to strike out with his fist. He was still too weak. If the gate of truth had already come into existence, he would never be so passive. So, since he must accept others' kind intentions, then he must strive to restore his divine strength as quickly as possible. Even if that would still be insignificant before the great ones, at least it would afford him some room to maneuver. Mr. Avon, regarding the use of this divine leaf, I have some questions that need your guidance. Quickly regaining his composure, Hermes immediately sought advice. Now that he had the assistance of great divine power, he definitely needed to create an artifact rare in this world. It would be a monument in the field of alchemy, as well as an indispensable part of his future gate of truth. And thinking back, didn't you say the serpent of the central court only cares about strength? Very well. You don't want to let me leave today, so I hope by the day I become a god, you better have become a deity as well. At the heart of the island, the crater of an unnamed volcano. Floating midair, looking at the undying flame gradually rising from the molten lava, Hermes took out the materials he had prepared in advance. Lachesis' divine artifact, the stone ruler of fate, the embryo of the gate of truth, and the fates locked within it, sealed away, containing the strong vitality and the light of wisdom, not inferior to the life origin liquid, the Yggdrasil leaf, and the memory extracted by Hermes himself from his own past. As perhaps the only living being from the fantasy world that survived, Hermes had discovered early on that his memory also contained a special power. As if that world that had been destroyed still lingered within him, continuing in some way. About this, Hermes had some conjectures. Within his powers, for the real world, matter, energy, information, and everything else are interconvertible. His memories might seem only a thing of the past, but perhaps they carry the power after its demise. However, the fantasy world is, after all, fantasy. Such transmutation is extremely limited, so the inheritance he carries may not be much. Like the ocean and the vapor above it, the difference between the two is as vast as the sky from the abyss. Gently shaking his head, Regardless of the truth, Hermes thought no more of it. The gate of starlight was now battered and riddled with holes, and had the demon fire not risen from the volcano, it might have already shattered. Now is the most fitting time. With a gesture, the artifact that still appeared as a cane plummeted into the profound maw of the volcano. Flames licked its shaft, and almost visibly to the eye, the artifact began to revert to its true form. Scars of time, arcane symbols, twilight began to ripple across the deep gray ruler. It seemed to sense its current peril, instinctively trying to escape from here. But before the raging demon fire, all efforts were in vain. The indomitable shell began to soften, black mist steaming off the gray stone. The backlash born with its master gradually left the artifact, drifting towards the gate of starlight. Milky liquids rolled continuously over its body. The true origin of the artifact was unbreakable. Luckily, Hermes didn't intend to smash it. He just wanted to turn it into the foundation of his creation. The mind concentrated, the great alchemist felt his state today was unprecedentedly good. The changes in material properties surged through his mind, inspiration bursting every moment. Not until the sun was about to fall to the west, and the moon just rising, did Hermes begin to move his spiritual hand. Day and night intersected, up and down reversed. He would create a spectacle unlike any before. In the center of Navern Island, 7 days and nights hurried by. The runes he had casually laid out shielded the surroundings, making it hard for nearby mortals to detect the commotion he was creating. Above the volcano's mouth, the materials previously spread out had long since vanished. What remained there was only a massive black forge. Chapter 934. Taking shape. Under intense spiritual concentration, 7 days passed in a flash. Above the volcano on Navern Island, this special casting approached its final step. Below the wide mountain mouth, the originally intense heat had faded without notice. Even the boiling magma had solidified, leaving behind large patches of dark rocks interwoven with patterns. Over the past several days, to supply energy to the hell demon fire, Hermes's will had delved deep into the earth's veins, causing the volcano's energy to be continuously extracted by man. This volcano, blessed by the god of craftsmanship, indeed contained substantial flame energy, which aided the entire smithing process. However, the energy required for melting the divine artifact was ultimately too enormous. After this event, even if the smithing were to end, it would likely remain dormant, with no possibility of eruption for thousands of years. Mid-air, spiritual energy converged at one point. Looking at the fluctuating void furnace, Hermes, though weary, could not hide his excitement. The furnace was not a physical entity but a construct evolved from hell demon fire. Inside it was the hard-earned crystallization of Hermes's efforts. Is this smithing? No, this is not smithing at all. This is merely integration, harmonization, and extraction. It is not transformation, nor is it exchange or sublimation. The only reason I can succeed today is that the materials for achieving it are too unique. Of course, it is precisely because of this that it has succeeded beyond my expectations. The power of the demon fire was nearing its end. The flames originating from the Lord of Hell began to gradually extinguish. Without external forces, this divine fire could have endured for 10,000 years unspoiled, but under Hermes's intense usage, it had been depleted early on in collisions where it repelled those materials. However, sensing the condition of the furnace, Hermes's face showed no concern, as it was intentional. As the founder of the Chaos Alchemy system, he knew exactly how long the Hell Demon Fire could be used. Yet for this last step, Hermes did not want to complete it with someone else's power. The alchemy constructs he forged with his own hands could only belong to him. Silently, a transparent flame suddenly ignited in front of Hermes in the void. There was no audible sound. What seemed like the sound of burning was just a mental illusion. His complexion turned pale instantly, but the great alchemist's spirit grew even more excited. This was the soul fire, a flame ignited by the burning of one's own spirit. As a former deity of the fantasy world, Hermes' own spirit was precisely the only near-God aspect of him at this moment. Under his control, the illusory spiritual fire collapsed in an instant, then enveloped the outer wall of the furnace. Gradually, the furnace body composed of demon fire faded bit by bit, replaced by invisible tongues of fire. Through the distorted space at high temperatures, Hermes could vaguely see the situation inside. A silvery white liquid clumped together in the air, rolling like blood. Threads of black material were wrapped inside it, constantly jostling left and right, but no matter how it struggled, it could not break free. With a sharp gaze, the pain of ignited spirit reminded Hermes, and watching this scene, the great alchemist slashed his own wrist. Bright red blood flowed into the flames, burning together the spirits and flesh from both the real and fantasy worlds. Vaguely, within the intertwining flames, Hermes seemed to see a human face. Lachesis seemed to be questioning him, asking why he betrayed her kindness towards him and instead raised his hand against the goddess. To defy fate, does that need a reason? I think not. A faint retort, followed by a conclusion. Stepping forward, Hermes faced the illusory visage. He did not know whether this was reality or illusion, but for him, the answer to these two didn't differ. To you, erasing unstable fate needs no reason. So for me, it's the same. In this world, many things do not need reasons, only necessity. Thus, under Hermes's firm resolve, the spiritual fire surged abruptly. In an instant, as if many things in this moment turned into fuel for the flames. There were Lachesis's deceit towards Paris, Hermes's understanding of fate and laws in the fantasy world, and some other indescribable things. The tongues of flame ascended, darting towards the great alchemist's cheeks and then gently licking his temples. In the reflection of the firelight, Hermes appeared both warm and icy cold. Time was unknown, but at a certain moment he reached forward. Hum. Eh? A hum from the depths of all things, standing beside the volcano. Even Lane's inquisitive gaze couldn't help but shift. In the next moment, from the void where nothing existed, chains suddenly materialized out of thin air. The laws of the world responded to this creation. No, they responded to the birth of this divine artifact. Although it had trapped the fates, its existence itself seemed to represent something, thus stirring the enthusiastic response of the laws. Feeling slightly moved, watching everything unfold, a strange intuition struck. This still unborn divine artifact seemed to be offending the authority of the spirit realm. More precisely, the authority that the spirit realm had obtained from chaos. The corresponding powers were trembling slightly, as if responding to the birth of this divine artifact. Chapter 935 Shaping_2. His gaze narrowed, and a flurry of thoughts passed through his mind in an instant. At this moment, Lane's fingers had even reached into the side of his robe, touching another leaf of the divine tree. If he wished, he could destroy the nascent divine artifact in its cradle and then bring back the fates in another way. But after a brief pause, Lane ultimately abandoned this plan. As a being divided in humanity, he could not accurately grasp the changes in the spirit realm at this moment. Or rather, even the remaining sensitivity was not necessarily a good thing, because it proved that the split in his humanity was not as perfect as imagined. Of course, Lane had known this a long time ago. In any case, after the initial shock had passed, Lane regained his calm. He had worried too much. A single divine artifact was far from sufficient to shake the foundation of the spirit realm, let alone strip the digested sustenance from its body. Even the most special divine authority required equivalent strength to support. Besides, the feeling it gave to himself was not one of danger or dread, but rather a vague sense of closeness. From various signs, it seemed that the divine artifact might indeed have some special function, but it was most likely not what he had in mind. Moreover, it was a creation made from materials he provided. In any case, it was impossible for it to threaten his own existence. This, unknown to Lane, facing away from him, Hermes had just walked on the edge of peril. At this moment, the casting of the divine artifact had reached the most critical part. The sudden resonance of the world laws certainly startled Hermes, But upon discovering that his alchemy had not been disturbed, the great alchemist calmed his spirit again. The change was unexpected, but it was clearly a good thing. This was not only beneficial for the casting of the current divine artifact but added a boost to the future formation of the Gate of Truth. So Hermes silently recorded the information brought by the surrounding low resonance in his memory, taking a deep breath. The next moment, he made a grasping motion in the air over the still unset liquid. An invisible great force acted on the rough outline of the divine artifact in an instant, with a powerful rebound force following a mysterious trajectory. However, faced with this scene, Hermes did not hesitate to begin the second, and then third attempt. 3 grasps, 3 rebounds under violent vibrations, the arms of the great alchemist cracked like porcelain. At the same time, the roiling liquid finally stabilized there, forming a specific shape and then gradually beginning to solidify. With silvery white as the main body, black and blood-red patterns interwoven on its surface. A strong life vitality was released from it, and as its caster, Hermes's originally shattered arms nearly recovered to normal at a visible speed. Clearly, regardless of its other abilities, at least the abundant life force from the alien realm's world tree had indeed been successfully inherited by this divine artifact. It may not compare with the true artifacts that govern life, but it was enough to compete with the chalice of the goddess of youth. As the divine artifact cooled down, new order and laws gradually became apparent. Looking at his final creation, Hermes was filled with joy. It was not meant to be an independent divine artifact. If the Gate of Truth were to be materialized in the future, Hermes had no doubt it could achieve this. But even with many powerful materials, Hermes did not believe he could now create a truly divine artifact. As the base that carries its illusory gateway, the stone ruler of Lachesis is another divine artifact with separate powers, and even if the great divine power changed its form, the great alchemist could not erase its essence. Moreover, accomplishing a true divine artifact would certainly require unique divine authority, something Hermes clearly did not possess. But all impossibilities had shifted with the world law's inexplicable resonance. The divine artifact's origin, which had been unyielding even under hell demon fire, was no longer insistent. Like a spring breeze that brings rain, a touch and it parted. Even within this strange resonance, Hermes found that the memories he had mixed in also underwent some special changes. It interwove with many other materials, together forming a new order. Just like how the world at the beginning had no law of fire, it seemed that without intention, a new puzzle piece was added to the world. It had no name, for it was a newly born entity. But if one must name it, Hermes thought virtual and real would be more suitable. By comparison, imparting wisdom, shaping life, these were merely additional functions. If not for the leaf of Yggdrasil originally coming from the 9 realms, and the mother tree had already interpreted life from another angle, this newborn divine artifact might not have inherited these abilities. Looks like it's a success? Basking in joy, the voice of Lane came from behind, interrupting Hermes's reverie. The smile froze for an instant, and it was then the great alchemist remembered that he had a significant problem by his side unresolved. Yes, Mr. Avon. Thanks to the great Lord of Hell, I have been able to complete this masterpiece. As you see, I have succeeded. Very well, with our Lord's assistance, your success was inevitable, Mr. Hermes. But now that you have succeeded, what is its use? Lane posed the direct question because having witnessed Hermes's entire alchemy process, he could guess the use of this magical alchemical object. It might grant life, for drinking water soaked with it could bestow immortality. It might bestow wisdom upon a person. Using it to enlighten oneself could solve mysteries previously incomprehensible. Or it might serve as a tool for divining fate, to peer into the past and future. It could also potentially act as a medium, transforming into a poison that curses living beings. But no matter what, this was merely a creation of the mortal world. It could not touch the realm of divine authority. Moreover, from its potential array of abilities, it seems quite similar to the Wise Man's Stone from later legends. It is a life stone, a soul stone, as well as a panacea, serving as an equivalent medium for converting all creations. However, such description obviously goes beyond the realm of the mortal world. Thus Lane did not harbor hope for it initially. Legends are always filled with exaggeration and falsehood. Similar instances had been seen aplenty before. Yet, as accidents occurred during the alchemical process, everything became enigmatically complex. A true divine artifact must represent its unique power. But with the current status, Lane could not discern the intricacies of the newly forged divine artifact. Only its caster could precisely feel the might it possessed. A mere object, truly nothing in front of the great Lord of Hell. As for its abilities, Hermes paused, then continued, I do not know why it underwent this transformation, but its true purpose, perhaps, is to turn those false lives into true existences. His memories and various divine materials mixed together, ultimately resulting in this unique metamorphosis. His spirit merged with the cooling divine artifact, and vaguely, Hermes felt he might be able to summon some very special beings with it. Chapter 936 Fear and Revival. The divine artifact is reborn, slowly cooling from its sweltering heat. Like naturally occurring patterns, they spread over its smooth, glossy white stone body. Lifting his hand, he took the floating divine artifact, a familiar sense of connection surging in Hermes's heart. This was a wondrous object forged from his memories and flesh, inherently and closely linked to him. There was no need to grope and learn. The moment Hermes touched it, he knew the true purpose of the divine artifact. Hesitating for a moment, and glancing at Lane who was waiting for the outcome, the great alchemist still gently pinched the white stone, invoking its power. The divine artifact resonated, emitting a halo of light. In the next instant, it seemed as if a song was being sung from the void. Antique melodies floated in the air, narrating the nobility and extraordinariness of fate. Lavish language praised the grandeur of Mount Nyssa, extolling the past and the future's revered existence. Within the blurry halo, a figure gradually materialized from nothingness, arriving before the two of them. With every movement, the figure's lofty demeanor was clearly visible. However, when her face became clear, Lane could not help but reveal a look of surprise. Lachesis. Uttering this name, examining the figure before him, Lane was astonished to find that this figure looked exactly like the previous goddess of destiny. Neither appearance nor aura revealed any flaws. The only difference was probably the intangible quality she emanated. Due to the backlash of fate, Chaos's three fates were far from mysterious and powerful like the gods of destiny in other worlds. They were like a paced-up artisan, patching up a crumbling house, but this one before him was different. If it weren't for the fact that this goddess's eyes were colorless, her pupils slack and lifeless, anyone who came might think she was the true goddess of destiny, Lachesis. What is happening? Lane asked. Hermes did not immediately respond. Instead, he caressed the white stone in his palm once more. Whoosh! The void trembled, and the original Lachesis disappeared. The blurry white light once again illuminated the room, and in her place appeared another Hermes. His garments were majestic, fitting perfectly, wearing shoes with delicate little wings on his feet. In his left hand, he held an ancient lyre, its body engraved with the symbol of the sun. His right hand held a silver balance scale, with gold coins and books on either side. He looked more mature, his attire vastly different, but unlike the previous Lachesis, this Hermes didn't feel so starkly detached from the one holding the divine artifact. They looked like the same person with only some distinctions in appearance. As you can see, this is the function of this divine artifact. It can blur reality and illusion, replicating in the flesh the existence from the holder's memory. In theory, it can replicate not only form but also emotions, powers, authority, as though the person was shaped out of thin air. But in reality, this is just an alternative form of deceit. Fake is fake. It is not a creature of the void. It simply turns a segment of memory into reality. Whether dead or alive, it can awaken them. Not the straightforward might assume it to be the revival of the deceased, but it's merely their own longing. Speaking slowly, holding the divine artifact in his hand, Hermes explained his understanding. And comparing it to his direct use, Lane also roughly grasped the concept. Through this artifact that resembled the wise man's stone, Hermes could conjure the figures from his memory, thereby utilizing their powers. However, personal understanding is inevitably imbued with personal nuances, and the differences in his two uses have made this quite clear. Lachesis in Hermes's impression was clearly not identical to the reality, yet his own self in memory would not differ from the actual Hermes. The application of the divine artifact was not hard to understand. Lane grasped it with ease. That mere memory could borrow the power of reality seemed a bit too far-fetched, even with the might of the divine artifact. While imitating power was one thing, if even divine authority could be imitated. Taking another careful look at the divine artifact in Hermes's hand, Lane's intuition told him it might be related to the abnormal reaction in the spirit realm. A glint of inquiry flashed in his eyes, then he shook his head gently. If he were in his complete state right now, Lane could easily pinpoint the problem. But as an embodiment of divided human nature, although he inherited most of the original memories, some were exceptions. In this mythic world, taboos related to the creation domain inherently carried a vast weight. Like a heavy sphere falling on a flat net, it would pull the owner involuntarily towards it. Yet, while most knowledge is neutral, at many times neutrality itself can be an influence. So, had Lane insisted on remembering at that time, he certainly could, but this would inevitably cause an unpredictable shift in the development of human nature. So it seems, that is a mighty divine artifact. With it in hand, Mr. Hermes could practically dub himself a little divine king. With a faint smile, Lane did not dwell too much on it. On hearing his words, Hermes shook his head repeatedly. Chapter 937 Fear and Revival _2. What minor divine king? Mr. Avon is really overestimating me. The power of a divine artifact has its limits. Not everyone can call upon its influence. Just like the great serpent of the central court, I cannot summon even a trace of it. It doesn't seem like he is lying, Hermes speaks earnestly. But Lane just smiles, not taking it too seriously. After all, even in the mythic world, many things must be logical, which is also why he's not too concerned about Hermes's secrets. Even if an object has not reached the domain of a Genesis artifact, and really summoned the great divine power, it would not allow the holder to immediately possess the corresponding strength. So if Hermes really did call forth the shadow of the great serpent, it might actually be a good thing. All right, Mr. Hermes. Whether you can do it or not, now you have crafted the wise man's stone with the help of my lord. For a mortal to forge a divine artifact, this achievement is enough to be sung about for 10,000 years. But everything is mutual, Mr. Hermes. Since you have already felt the greatness of my lord, isn't it time you did something to show your gratitude to him? Of course. I would like to refuse if you'd give me the chance. Shaking his head secretly, Hermes was mentally prepared for Lane's request. No one would help him for no reason. The cost just depends on whether it is openly stated or implied. Aside from the expected request, there is another matter that leaves the great alchemist somewhat frustrated. The divine artifact was perfected, and before he had a chance to name it, someone had already self-appointed it with the title Wise Man's Stone. Although it resonates with him when he hears it, the fact that it first came from someone else's lips still bothers Hermes. However, after pondering for a while, the great alchemist ultimately can't think of a better name. Therefore, he can only reluctantly decide to give the wise man's stone another name to signify his existence. Memory Stone? Eye of Illusion and Reality? Star of Athens? Related or not, name after name flashes through his mind, each rejected one by one. After much contemplation, Hermes recalls his previous introduction to the functionality of the divine artifact. To the uninformed, it may seem like an artifact for awakening the dead, but it's merely a response to yearning. If the alias of the divine artifact is to be widespread, isn't it meant for those superficial mortals to see? Let's call it Resurrection Stone. Even though he considers himself a true sage for creating the wise man's stone, the Resurrection Stone can't actually resurrect anyone, and the two don't seem quite equivalent. But Hermes feels this doesn't matter. Compared to the elusive sage, for most people, resurrection is more relevant to their lives. Although he's spirited after completing the divine artifact, it can't overcome the exhaustion of his body. Lane has more to say, but there's no need to choose this particular moment. So, taking a temporary break, Hermes finds a secluded stream to recuperate. Holding the newly acquired divine artifact in his hand, Hermes feels a bit proud of his luck. Even in the fantasy world, each divine artifact he possessed came at a considerable cost, and their powers might not even surpass the strength of the wise man's stone. If Hermes's winged shoes and the lyre gifted by Apollo are considered the lowest tier of divine artifacts, akin to the weak divine power among deities, then the newly created wise man's stone could probably already touch the edge of intermediate divine power. Especially this special authority, it further enhances the value of this divine artifact. But these abilities could more accurately be attributed to luck rather than one's own power. Just as Lane felt surprised, Hermes himself was also aware of how terrifying it was to be able to borrow their powers, not just to conjure projections of deities. In the previous description, the great alchemist deliberately avoided a detailed explanation of this, as if the power he borrowed was just a trivial part. But in reality, he found that he could achieve more than 30% of the actual deity's effects. 30%, it seems low, but for the deities wielding authority, they often only need a fraction of their strength to achieve what others cannot accomplish even with 100-fold effort. From this, one can see how rare it was for Hermes to borrow this authority. It was a distortion of inherent concepts, a subversion of the world's order. If he had the strength of great divine power level, then the minor divine king Lane jokingly referred to might even be an understatement. If he could also overcome the limitation of summoning only one type of projection at a time, then people should probably start referring to the divine king as minor Hermes. However, such ability is obviously not what he should possess, and even the primordial gods would not create a divine artifact that so blatantly violates the world order. Thus, the only explanation is the same as the reason for the law's resonance that led to his complete refinement of the fate's divine artifact. Hermes attributed the cause to his own past. There were 3 people related to the chaos world. The Lord of the Spirit Realm took all the strength that could be gathered and used it to deal a fatal blow to Heminu. What Athena gained was unknown, but she clearly had her own plans. Compared to the former 2, Hermes was far from their equal in power. He was merely a native being of the fantasy world, and even his counterpart in the outside world was unlikely to be born. Perhaps for this reason, he received the favor of this shattered world. In his memory lay the information left behind by this world. Touching upon the creation domain, even the faint traces left by the fantasy world were miracles beyond the imagination of mortals and many deities. It attracted the favor of the laws, as well as the birth of the wise man's stone. Although Hermes was not very clear about this point, he could roughly guess. Idly touching the immaculate stone, the great alchemist felt a hint of hesitation in his heart. When he faced Lane before, he did not lie, but he did not tell the whole truth either. He still harbored apprehensions regarding the so-called Lord of Hell. For instance, he indeed could not summon the projection of the great serpent of the central court, but it was not because the latter was too powerful. The reason he couldn't do it was that the fantasy world had no record of the other party. Yes, the power of the projections made by the wise man's stone was so potent, it even exceeded the limits of a divine artifact. Its only non-defect was that it could only manifest beings that had no authority or those deities that once existed in the fantasy world. Just like the Lachesis Hermes summoned, she was actually not the projection of the fates from reality, but that of the fantasy world. Perhaps this is also why the borrowed authority only had a 30% effect. The artifact may have perfectly replicated the other's power, but the fantasy brought into reality, even in the same world, had only 30% effectiveness. In a way, this was actually a good thing. For instance, in Hermes' memory, the moon goddess of the fantasy world was distinctly more powerful than her real counterpart, and there were many similar examples. But there were also shortcomings, such as the serpent of the central court, a being absent in the fantasy world, Hermes was unable to summon. Furthermore, although he had not tried it, Hermes could probably be sure that he might be able to project even the primordial deities, just with unknown consequences. The unknown answer was precisely what he hesitated over now. Great divine power and true gods are different, but whether they are still different in front of the fantasy world, Hermes was not sure. He wanted to try but feared attracting misfortunes. And deep down in the heart of the great alchemist, even the primordial deities were not the ones he wanted to summon the most. Compared to that figure who occupied his thoughts day and night, even the so-called primordial deities didn't really matter. Chapter 938. Emerald Ring. Destruction. With a complex gaze, caressing the wise man's stone in his hand, Hermes once again recalled that day after many years. The Lord of Thunder, the King of Kings, the tall and mighty Father God Zeus on Mount Olympus, desperately struggling in despair. The sun fell from the sky, and the underworld had already become void. Beneath the earth was a hollow space, and the star cluster was dim and lightless. That day, the entire world summoned all its strength in an attempt to resist that destroyer, and at that time, Hermes was just a powerless onlooker. The only thing he could do was find a thread of survival for himself. Fortunately, he succeeded, after all. Compared to commerce, competition, and livestock, travel and exchange were the most fundamental essence of Hermes' divinity. Even in his youth, it was through these that he completed a trade with Apollo, much commemorated by later mythologies, and thereby obtained the power of the god of commerce. Unfortunately, he wasn't completely successful, because even to this day, Hermes cannot be 100% certain who the destroyer really was. Though he had long had guesses and doubts, it wasn't uncommon for great divine powers to deceive and hide from one another. In the fantasy world, Hermes, one of the 12 main gods of Olympus, although also a true god in the domain of powerful divine force, was not adept at discerning truths, seeing through falsehood. And for those things that couldn't be faked, such as the truly genuine divine artifacts, Hermes couldn't find the corresponding one in the real world, such as that dazzlingly green ring, which initiated the start of his alchemy. After coming to the real world, the great alchemist once sought its whereabouts in various ways, even dubbing his organization of wizards as the Emerald Ring. Unfortunately, to this day he has found no rumors related to it. These confusions had existed in Hermes' mind for too long, and previously, he had no qualifications to seek the answer. But now, with the birth of the wise man's stone, the great alchemist felt that he could reconsider this issue. Clutching the warm stone, Hermes tried to recall that day of destruction in his mind. He hadn't seen the true face of that figure. From beginning to end, all he saw was that one hand that descended from beyond the sky, destroying everything. The wise man's stone glowed faintly, its hazy halo illuminating Hermes' face. Although in the illusory world, that destroyer deity didn't exist. But since he stepped into this world, and even destroyed it with his own hand, his information was inevitably recorded by the world itself. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. To invoke a great one, even if merely by authority and not by strength, the power Hermes needed to exhaust was far beyond a true god's match. So little by little, he poured his own strength into the divine artifact. The images in his memory gradually became clear, just waiting to pass a certain critical point, it would resonate with the law under the effect of the divine artifact. By then, the great alchemist could determine the other's identity through authority, which was also the best solution. After all, displayed strength can be faked, appearance and aura can be disguised, but a deity's authority cannot. At least until the birth of the wise man's stone, this was the iron rule in Hermes' understanding. So time slowly passed, and at a certain moment, the great alchemist seemed to have found the right opportunity. "No, stop!" he blurted out. And then suddenly, at the foot of the mountain, Hermes forcefully terminated his own action at this moment. The wise man's stone, which was about to activate, suddenly went dark. The backfiring power fell back onto itself, turning the face of the great alchemist deathly pale. For a mortal to force-stop the use of a divine artifact would result in extremely serious consequences for the user. However, as the forger and true owner of the divine artifact, Hermes was exempt from most of it. Yet, even without sustaining severe injuries, the great alchemist's complexion was still unsightly. Because just now, At the moment he was about to complete the summoning, a nameless fear attacked his heart without warning. Destruction, ruin, death, and wailing, the end of a world, the curse of billions of living beings. Perhaps because the foundation of the wise man's stone was Lachesis' divine artifact, and she is still imprisoned within it. At that moment, Hermes felt as if he had glimpsed a terrifying scene. This was the memory of the world, not the false one, but the one recorded by the real world he was now in. His heart pounding violently, Hermes felt his hands go cold. He never imagined that the destroyer of the fantasy world was actually a thorough destroyer, and the objects of his destruction even included another real world. Too terrifying, unimaginable. Though it was just a fleeting glimpse, Hermes was still shocked. The world-destroying demon god stood above the corpse of the world, countless fragments swirling and dancing around him. Had it not been for the reflection of the world law, Hermes felt he would never have known about this. Is he warning me? No, the world would not warn me. It is just that my divine artifact's power comes from the fantasy of the chaos world, and the fantasy chaos is closely linked with the reality. And because the world-destroying demon god is not here, my call for his projection inadvertently brought about the reaction from the law first. Had I not stopped, perhaps the power of the wise man's stone would have continued to act, manifesting the reflection of the real from the void. But then, nobody would know what would happen. Perhaps nothing would happen, the other party might not even notice my peeking. Or perhaps something would happen, and the price I absolutely do not want to bear. The real world, is this still great divine power? A flicker of horror in his eyes, if not for that sudden premonition. Hermes felt he might have been gone by now. He dared to touch upon great divine power briefly, as it was not something he had never seen. In fact, not long ago, he had used the power of a lord of hell to craft his own divine artifact. But an existence that could contend with the real world. Just thinking about what happened to Zeus in the fantasy world, Hermes knew he would fare much worse. Before, he comforted himself by thinking, that was just the fantasy world. Perhaps great divine power could exhibit the same strength there in the real world. But now, Hermes didn't think so. So what exactly is his purpose? An invader from outside? The root cause of world destruction? He sought out the fantasy world first, perhaps as a rehearsal for the ultimate destruction of chaos? In that fleeting vision, although his current strength was still quite limited, Hermes's vision allowed him to make a judgment. That shattered world's remnants were probably inferior to chaos, and maybe that's also why the world remains stable for now. I'm still safe, though this is all but temporary. Shaking his head vigorously, Hermes tried to dispel the negative emotions from the depths of his heart. He had run away once before, but this time he might not have the chance to run again. Moreover, unlike the last time, considering that the world-destroying demon god has been hesitant to make a move, it seems that he harbors considerable fear of chaos. No wonder I've searched the world over and couldn't find a trace of that alchemy divine artifact. Because it doesn't belong to chaos, of course. I wouldn't be able to find it. Heh! I really didn't expect this, but looking at it this way, perhaps the world favors me enough to let me live. Even when faced with the threat of death, insignificant as I am, I still inherited its legacy. The previous speculation was instantly overturned. The world-destroying demon god is likely not a deity of chaos, but his enemy. And now I understand why there is no alchemy inheritance in the world, despite my creation of alchemy after observing the divine artifact. Not because it originated from an ancient god who never interacts with the outside world, but because it simply isn't a creation of chaos. Suddenly, an immense pressure hit me. But the next moment, Hermes suddenly smiled lightly. How interesting! To strive to become stronger in preparation for a world-ending enemy, to pass through trials and ordeals with the favor of the world, seizing various opportunities along the way, then ascending to the divine throne, achieving greatness, ultimately wielding the power of the world in a fierce battle against an external foe, either perishing together / returning from a tragic victory / inflicting heavy damage upon him, succeeding in stalling for time. Is this my script? although I might be overthinking it if I replace world with all gods, and me with a human hero, it seems there's nothing incorrect about it. Fighting tooth and nail, battling for the benefit of the all gods, and with a bit of luck, achieving a perfect success, even having a chance to ascend to immortality, this is a decent outcome for a mortal. It's just a pity. You've misread me. This isn't the script I want. Compared to this, I'd rather let the tall ones prop up the falling sky. With a slight smile, recalling the issues that had been troubling him just now, Hermes felt suddenly enlightened. The Lord of Hell, the serpent of the central court, right? He had been wondering how to let himself grow safely, at least to ascend to a divine position first, instead of becoming an inconsequential pawn in the clash of the great. But now, doesn't he have a way? Find a way to inform that Lord of Hell about this matter, and let it be their headache. Standing at the pinnacle of Chaos World, they possess more than I do and are even less likely to give up all that they have. If it can't resolve the problem alone, it will surely seek more great divine powers to confront this fearsome opponent. In this way, even the world would be at peace.
I'm truly magnificent.
World peace. Such a grand proposition, and I've accomplished it. I recall the goddess of harmony apparently married a human hero who had contributed greatly to the divine king, as a reward for his service. I don't ask for much, just that the noble mother of the world grants me a reward of the same caliber. Silently smirking to himself, Hermes shook his head, chuckling at his own predicament. From a different perspective, the trouble he faced seemed to be a blessing in disguise. Holding the divine artifact, the great alchemist could not help but admire his own cleverness. However, this means I can no longer project that fearsome world destroyer willy-nilly. So, I'll settle for something else. Let me change my target. With a tight grip of his right hand, a hazy halo appeared once more. Talking about changing targets, at this moment, Hermes once again recalled the day the fantasy world had shattered. The divine king was howling at the sky, and the hand of destruction covered the heavens. The entire fantasy world, they were the most worthy objects of Hermes' projection. In past and present, the great divine power has always been something beyond his reach. Thus, his thoughts slightly stirred, displaying the power of the wise man's stone without any reservation. Hermes focused his projection on the divine king, on the alchemy ring shining with jade on the great hand. The divine light flickered, and this time, the indistinct halo quickly reconvened. Without any special mishaps, right before Hermes' eyes, a ring like jade quietly floated in midair. Tiny runes were etched on it, as if elucidating some supreme truth of the world. This wasn't Hermes' first glance at this scene, but even having seen it once before, as the ring reappeared before his eyes, he still greedily absorbed everything before him. A foreign alchemy artifact, unlike the contrived wise man's stone, was genuinely crafted through pure alchemy skill, not by the accumulation of materials or the deviation of fate. On it, the casters seemed to be boasting their skill, incising knowledge that pointed directly to the essence one after another. From their brief encounter in the past, Hermes had received his initial enlightenment. Building upon this fragmentary knowledge with his own interpretation, he had created the path of alchemy that now existed in chaos. However, as he delved into domains that touched upon the divine, Hermes eventually felt somewhat powerless. Not being able to summon the projection of the destroyer was no big deal. The power of Zeus wasn't particularly attractive to him either. The strength of the divine king, from this world, seemed less like divine authority or a law and more like a status or position. Hermes was unsure what he could gain from it, but this ring was different. Seeing it, Hermes saw his own future. Do you go by the name Draupner? When the divine artifact materialized, the great alchemist knew its name. The substance exchange, Draupner, the ring. Just hearing it felt in perfect harmony with him, very befitting of his past divine nature of commerce and exchange. Reaching out, Hermes slid the ring onto his index finger and downsized the wise man's stone, placing it on top of the ring, and thus, a pieced-together ring was born. Two supreme creations of alchemy joined together, looking quite in sync, their powers even resonating slightly. For a moment, Hermes couldn't help but yearn for a true divine artifact. Just a false creation had such an allure. If the real thing were to fall into his hands, not to look too far ahead. At the very least, to fuse them again, creating a high-grade artifact in the alchemy domain should pose no great difficulty. Chapter 939 Choice. From today forth, the Emerald Ring Alchemy Organization finally has its true Emerald Ring, although it's merely a projection of a fake. The faint divine nature pulsated actively within Hermes, absorbing power from both flesh and spirit. After one success and one failure in his experiments, Hermes decided to conduct his very last experiment. Although the summoning of the destroyer had failed, the great alchemist still received invaluable information. The summoning of Draupner was successful, which meant he was about to progress faster and more steadily in the realm of alchemy. So, to Hermes at this moment, the problem he needed to solve became quite clear. Whether it be the threat of the destroyer, the Lord of Hell with unknown intentions, or any other issue, the simplest and most difficult solution to solve them was to enhance his own strength, be it internal or external. However, since the Gate of Truth wasn't built in a day, Hermes had no choice but to seek solutions from external objects. Conveniently, the Wise Man's Stone had the means to solve the problem. As long as he could summon a projection of great divine power, then even if his own strength was meager, he asserts that he could stride across the mortal realm unchecked. After all, even the weakest great divine power possesses an insurmountable gap with true gods. Just like the Lord of the Nine Hells when Hell was newly born, Zeus with his incomplete divine status back when the 12 main gods were yet to take their places. A three-part divine authority, though not large, still represents a qualitative change. Thus, with flickering eyes, Hermes rubbed the Wise Man's Stone for the third time. The halo scattered, undulating around the great alchemist. Perhaps because the creation force that supports the evolution of the fantasy world is scarce. Among the projections that the Wise Man's Stone could summon, Hermes did not find options for the Lord of Darkness and the Night God. Including Earth Mother Gaia, these primordial deities exist more as legends within the world. They have no physical form, or rather, the world is theoretically their physical form. All gods know of their existence, but no one has truly seen them, not even once. Among these venerable beings, only the Divine King is an exception, for their connection with the world is too intimate. Therefore, at this moment, Hermes only has one choice. Come forth, the mighty sovereign of the gods, King of kings, and the ancestor of my bloodline. Step into the real world. Fight for me. Murmuring softly, just like summoning the destroyer before, Hermes' strength ceaselessly poured into the Wise Man's Stone. However, the divine artifact was like a bottomless pit, endlessly devouring his power. Until a certain moment, it was as if crossing an invisible boundary. A vague halo in front of Hermes gradually coalesced into one. A towering and majestic figure stepped out from it. Around him, chains reached out from the void, yet hesitating to approach his body. This was the order of laws avoiding his power, even with just fragmented strength and less than 1/3 of divine authority. But since he had not truly exhibited his power, the chains of order could only waver in the air. In an instant, horror and ecstasy surged across his face simultaneously. Though this was Hermes' own doing, he still felt a profound sense of surprise when he actually succeeded. His power had not been strengthened. Within the figure before him, what supported its existence was still the power Hermes had infused. But in front of that vast and exceptional divine stature, even pebbles seemed to turn into gold. Is this feeling the great divine power? Taking a deep breath, for the first time since the fates sought him out, Hermes felt a sense of security. To have quality without quantity? No matter, as the only alchemist of this age, Hermes has 10,000 ways to create divine-level energy. What he needs is an entity that can transform energy into divine power. And now that entity is right before his eyes. He is the king of all gods, Uranus. Ah, my most venerable great-grandfather. You are the lord of the sky, the monarch of all things and all spirits. The deity race rose because of you, Sovereign came into existence because of you. Your figure shines brighter than the sun above, your power more boundless than the vast earth. Praise you, my great-grandfather, I, Hermes, especially praise your greatest virtue. After all, you are both the divine king and a true great one. Yet at that crucial step you could have taken, both in the fantasy world and in the real chaos, you had already failed and then fell into an eternal slumber. In a chant-like tone, Hermes sung and praised the Heavenly Father, and even could not help but laugh out loud. Yes, the Lord of the Sky, the original Divine King, this is the phantom he has summoned. If only the Divine King can be summoned by the wise man's stone, does he have to choose Zeus? Don't be ridiculous. Perhaps mortals on the ground might think so, but Hermes would never be so superficial. After all, the great alchemist knows very well that Zeus's power is so intricately linked to his kingship. Compared to that, he himself is merely a deity who wields thunder. So no one knows if Hermes chose Zeus, whether the summoned being would be the one with 3 parts of the divine authority and symbolism, or simply the thunder god Zeus. Chapter 940 Selection _2. Besides that, there is a crucial point. That is, no one knows whether summoning the great divine power of an existing god will draw the attention of its master. If Zeus were to sense it, Hermes, who had just cooperated with the divine king's great enemy to defeat the Fates, would be in deadly peril. In such a case, Hermes naturally knew to seek good fortune and avoid disaster. Excluding Zeus, the second-generation god-king seemed to be another choice. However, it is not hard to realize that this too is a trap. In the fantasy world, Cronus, the king of Temporal, never touched the great divine power. But in the real world, this is indeed a god of gods. Although he has disappeared, disappearance is neither imprisonment nor eternal sleep. For the great divine power that controls time and space, Hermes does not believe he could escape its pursuit. Therefore, after eliminating the above 2 options, the first-generation god-king is the best choice. In the first epoch, the sky and patriarchy were just born, and they had not yet expanded to possess complete symbolism. Even though Uranus merged these elements with the power of the original god-king, he just possessed the ultimate strength of a true god. However, as the Heavenly Father slumbered and time passed, in the third epoch of the fantasy world and the second epoch of the real world, both had already undergone their own transformations. It is only because Uranus has not yet awakened that the world remains calm. Thus, whether summoning the projection of the great divine power would connect with its corresponding existence or not, Hermes need not worry. Because even if it does, the eternally slumbering Lord of the Sky has no time to trouble him. After waiting for a while, it turned out just as he thought. Nothing special happened. His third summoning once again gave Hermes a perfect result. With the protection of the Lord of the Sky, he could finally deal with the believers of hell with confidence. Equal help is true assistance. Unequal is either charity or ransom. Although in their eyes my life isn't worth much, I still highly value it. Smiling and shaking his head, Hermes tries to give the Lord of the Sky's projection a command. The next moment, the towering figure soars into the heavens, merging with the sky above the great alchemist's head. The real Uranus hangs at the end of the sky, and Hermes would not want to see what happens if the projection meets its eternally slumbering true self. He only wants this old ruler to protect him, not to awaken him and bring major trouble upon himself. Above the firmament at the edge of the sky, since time immemorial, from when Cronus severed the limbs of the Heavenly Father with a sickle, the sky of chaos has fallen into eternal tranquility. Aside from the primordial gods born with the world, this oldest celestial god almost embodies all the characteristics of men from the savage era. He is tall and powerful, possessing intense desires and unrivaled divine might. He is brutal and cold, so much so that even his wife and children fear him. He is also proud and straightforward. No one is worthy of his concealment, nor is anyone worth his retreat. He needs no rituals or civilization, for these are needless in the savage era. He only requires absolute strength and the absolute authority to rule everything. From this perspective, even if people in later ages look back at this ancient history, they would find it hard to truly comprehend whether it was right or wrong. Because in the wild and chaotic wilderness, with human groups surrounded by enemies, perhaps such patriarchy is indeed the safeguard of safety and life. Even if someone could fight alongside Uranus against a formidable enemy, perhaps the cruelty of the celestial god would be his greatest reliance. This oldest king would simply laugh forward and clash with the so-called enemies until the final moment of his life. As for whether you help in battle or flee, he probably won't even glance at you. What awaits you is at most a scoff. Unfortunately, chaos is ultimately an epic of the gods. The gods have no external enemies. They are enemies to each other. Celestial God and Mother Earth have no rivals. The entire world is merely their home. So, until the moment before eternal sleep, Heavenly Father could only unleash his endless tyranny upon his offspring. Unable to demonstrate against a rival, he could only show it to his descendants. But after his long sleep, due to the fear of the most ancient divine king, no one dared to speak his name, and everything on earth became irrelevant to him. Thus, time continued to pass, and millennia upon millennia elapsed on earth. In the sky, amid the bends of time, the eternally sleeping celestial god passed countless ages. Yet, time meant nothing to the celestial god. Over millions of years, only on a few rare occasions did movements almost awaken the Lord of the Sky from his slumber. The most recent was due to the changes in the ocean, but under the power of the Lord of Darkness, the celestial god returned to his deep sleep. But this time, there seemed to be something different. An indescribable will struggles and stirs, and at this moment, the boundless firmament seems to come alive. Although something is still missing, with world after world breaking and merging, patriarchy, which had once been balanced or even dominant with the advent of the Third Era, no longer seems so absolute. The deepest slumber seemed to be approaching its end, a mighty infinite power poised to unleash. Atop Mount Olympus, an inexplicable palpitation surged to the divine king's heart, prompting him instinctively to grasp his scepter and scan the entirety of the mortal realm. But at that moment, the accumulated dark tide suddenly stopped again. Once eternal sleep is entered, it is difficult to awaken, as the Supreme will merely freeze a tiny edge from the impact of divine authority. The stimulations from the mortal realm were like the final straw that broke the camel's back, guiding him out of his slumber. But in the next instant, this feint will seem to be distracted by something else. Still that beacon from the mortal realm, different from every previous time, this time it was persistent and constant. Even faintly, along invisible connections, streams of information continuously flowed back to the sky. There were calm oceans, busy mortals, novel divine artifacts, civilization and wisdom. The eyes of the celestial god had not yet opened, but at this moment, he seemed to have acquired another pair of eyes to observe the long-missed mortal realm on his behalf. The originally active will calm down. It was no longer so eager to awaken. If it were truly the Lord of the Sky, this scene would never happen. Because the celestial god would never be satisfied with just this. Everything in the world belongs to him. However, at this moment, the will of the celestial god was still sluggish, with only the slightest hint of a waking sign at the edges. So, upon receiving this external information, it seems to have been placated and became calm again. In the short term, this is good. A major disaster was temporarily averted, and the palpitations in the heart of the divine king on Mount of the Gods vanished without a trace. Save for the giant holding up the sky feeling a momentary quiver, no one noticed anything amiss. But if time were to be extended, external information would slowly stimulate this dormant will, and even when he awakens, it could accelerate his understanding of the new era. But whether for good or bad, everything has clearly become an established fact. The perpetrator of all this had no idea what had happened. Only time continued to flow. Meanwhile, in the distant void, atop the graves of shattered worlds, an immensely grand will fluctuated slightly. It looked toward the fragments of the world, just as before. He has become faster. No one responded, but indeed, the shrinking of the primordial water had subtly quickened a negligible amount. However, the void had no spectators. It was filled with darkness and cold. Other than that, there was only the one true God. Chapter 941 Report. 9 Hells, Central Court. Double suns hang in the sky, the shadows of the floating islands reflected on the ground. In the basin at the center of the interface, the once small sapling has now become a towering giant tree. Like the world tree Yggdrasil, 3 thick roots extend outward, one buried in the divine spring beneath the tree, the remaining 2 reaching directly to the 3rd and 7th layers of hell. 6 branches pierce into the void, their destinations unknown, while the remaining 3 hang from the tree crown. Occasionally, some unripe fruits can be spotted atop it, merely hidden among the leaves. Divine tree Nodahill, rooted atop the central axis of the 9 hells. Apart from the roots embedded in the divine spring, the other 2 roots are densely covered with blood-red veins. They pulsate as if alive, continuously channeling dark red sap back toward the trunk. Chaos, sin, filth, countless negative emotions and disorderly powers mingle together, even instinctively trying to corrupt this divine tree that spans realms. However, once the sap reaches the base of the trunk through the roots, an opposing force has long been waiting. Lianar Spring, the precursor to the Well of Ward of the 9 realms. Nodahill's 3rd root sips its water, drawing in vitality and the divine power of purification. The essence of the divine spring flows directly upwards through the 3rd root system, where milky liquid meets the dark red blood at the trunk. The impurities gradually settle, the pure specks rise. These energies, containing slight traces of ultimate source power, nourish the growth of the entire divine wood. And after the final refinement by the divine tree itself, this feeble source power is influenced by the characteristics of the world tree. It becomes better suited for the realm's absorption, then flows along the newly grown branches toward the far end of the void. Like a machine that purifies impurities, or an organ that creates nutrients for the world. The divine tree, once soaked in the waters of the well of reincarnation, became the midpoint of the cycle of the 9 hells, bringing new momentum to this world adrift in the abyss. Its body coiled at the edge of the world, the ancient serpent quietly watches everything happening in the central court, seemingly indifferent to the outside world. In its eyes, this scene has long been unfolding. Yet, it is precisely because of this cycle that the 2 monarchs of the 9 hells gradually stabilized their powers. World Tree, truly a marvel of creation. Grand ideas drift through the air, objectively speaking, although the creation of the 9 hells was a great concept and Tartarus's power sufficiently vast and profound. But from the beginning, relying solely on the former powers of hell to support 2 great divine powers was quite inadequate. Within this, Asmodeus relies on the legitimate title of Lord of Hell to barely cross this line, while the Serpent of the Central Court even borrows substantial power from the divine tree. After all, as the former world tree of the 9 realms and the only plant Lane has seen that reached the domain of great divine power, Yggdrasil has transcendent abilities in stabilizing worlds. With its help, only the 3 layers of hell managed to maintain the power possessed by the malignant thoughts of spirituality. However, this state is ultimately dangerous, much like Gaia, who nearly fell from the realm, or Zeus, whose ritual was incomplete, formidable to the weak but hardly victorious against the strong. Not until the establishment of the Azura field did the 9 hells finally begin to return to the right track. Endless wars, endless bloodshed. Though outnumbered, compared to the chaos of abyssal creatures, the demons of hell indeed have an advantage. In this process, every victorious battle not only strengthens the victor but also signifies a subtle reversal between 2 interfaces. And compared to the rewards for victors per the rules of the Azura field, hell has another way of recycling waste. That is to drag the demon corpses to where Nodahill's roots are located, piled up into a mountain of bones. The demons conduct grand blood sacrifices to their lord, then the power of the blood sacrifice flows along the divine tree's root system into the central court. After purification by Lianar Spring and refinement by Nodahill, it becomes nutrients nurturing the world. And depending on which lord the initiators of the sacrifice belong to, they sacrifice to that entity. Under the effect of true names, these refined powers also belong to that lord, used to enhance their own domains. Thus, distinguished demons will be promoted and rewarded, while the inadequate ones will be demoted and punished. Nodahil then draws some energy for its own growth and uses it to cultivate leaves, forming the foundation of devil contracts. Eventually, the lord who receives the sacrifices strengthens the powers of their realm, even if such enhancements are but bricks in the overall growth of the 9 hells. They will eventually become part of the power of the 2 monarchs, then further resist the power of the abyss. Accumulating earth forms mountains, accumulating water forms abysses. Under the unique flow of time in the abyss, a long time has passed in the 9 hells. Because of the benefits gained, the ancient serpent can afford to demonstrate its powers in the material world. Heh! Poseidon, you can't stay here much longer. Before you leave, don't you want to say something? Chapter 942 Report _2. Activate your barren brain, not your useless muscles. Perhaps a flash of inspiration might lead me to release you. Underneath the sky of the central court, the tone infused with mockery, malice almost overflowing from the eyes. The sun above illuminates the canopy of Nodahil, where a disheveled figure is impaled by the branches of the divine wood through the spine. Blue hair cascaded down, covering the ferocious face of Poseidon. Yet upon hearing this voice, the only response from the Sea Emperor is to swear vehemently. Shut up, monster! Son of the world will not submit to you twisted lackeys. I, Lord of the Sea, will never bow to you crazed creatures. Full of vigor, it appears Poseidon looks wretched. But he hasn't suffered much torment since being abducted to hell. At least compared to the god of the stars, Astraeus, his treatment is relatively good right now. However, Poseidon seems not to realize his own luck. Though the power gap is vast, the struggle of the Sea Emperor never ceased. It seems slightly off from Poseidon's usual character. At least the serpent of the central court distinctly remembered that at the end of the Second Era, the adversary showed no such fearlessness in the face of its father. Thus, after slight testing, considering the very limited intelligence of the other, the ancient serpent quickly discerned the reason. In Poseidon's eyes, he seems to have regarded hell similar to the Blood Mother tree. A long time ago, when Lane obliterated that fantasy world, the Divine King seemed to have received some message, giving out a cryptic prophecy. Be wary of the outsider, just a fragmented sentence, without a specific target. Previously, ever since Typhon's death, due to the long-standing peace, all gods had pushed it out of mind. But with Poseidon's personal descent into hell, he seemed to have determined that what Zeus said might indeed pertain to the great serpent in front of him. After all, the creations forged by the power of the Blood Mother tree are almighty, and none of them humanoid. And having witnessed the fall of the god of sun, considering himself a member of the Son of the World, Poseidon's fighting spirit was forced to surge. After all, the consequence of surrender is merely erosion, and with Poseidon's personality, it's better to curse heartily. Heh, Lord of the Sea! Lord of the Sea who can only sow seeds, whose sole dominion was handed over by others under pressure from Zeus. Compared to your brothers, you are equally useless. Unconcerned by Poseidon's curses, the ancient serpent's retort struck home. It conveniently sealed Poseidon's mouth, not affording him the chance to retort. It won't be long before he seeks out his old father. Whatever he thinks now, it's not worth any extra effort on its part. Regarding teaching children, Asmodeus will probably know how to rectify his wayward son's erroneous thoughts, along with providing a heart-wrenching lesson. Shifting its gaze from Poseidon, the serpent of the central court habitually glanced at the third layer of hell. Hypnos has yet to return, its whereabouts unknown. The great serpent was certain it wasn't imprisoned, only their link severed, a faint sense of perception remaining. Hiss! Low hissing noise, the serpent of the garden withdrew its gaze. Not wanting to return or facing some troubles, it hardly mattered since there was no need for Hypnos recently. It's better to leave him outside and if needed to venture out, than to bring him back conveniently. Great! The sound of beings praying came from a distance, yet unlike the usual casual prayers, this belonged to another self's exclusive channel. With a slight stir of thoughts, the the serpent of the central court slightly inclined its head, trailing the insubstantial line of faith with its will. If it were any other beings, such an act would crash their souls instantly. But since it was another self, there was no need to worry about such problems. What's the matter? Thoughts passed through layers of void, extending from hell to the material world. The earthly python noticed that beside itself, there was another figure, and in his hand, there was a familiar aura. Dropner. Slightly startled, the serpent of the central court immediately probed into the void surrounding Nodahill. Near the crown of the tree, there was a hidden venue, a secret vault sealed layer by layer. Long before the divine left chaos, some objects that didn't involve the operation of the spirit realm but might still be needed, had already been moved here. The poison that knocked down Poseidon and the leaves from Yggdrasil originated from there, and so did the real Dropner. As the earthly python's thoughts delved in, that alchemical divine artifact, more symbolically significant than practical, was indeed properly placed there, without any sign of loss. Cough, cough. In the mortal realm, on Navern Island, Hermes looked at the crude altar in front of him, feeling secretly astonished. In his experience, the descent of the gods was never this simple. Even the thoughts that didn't involve strength typically required divine materials, and only statues worshipped for hundreds of years could withstand their extending will. Moreover, no deity could tolerate neglect from their own believers, so every call to a deity was often accompanied by grand ceremonies. But at this moment, right in front of him, that grand and undeniable thought crossed time and space, its formidable power stirring the void around. It seemed that this indeed was an existence who didn't care about superficial fame. While secretly amazed, facing the inquiry of the great divine power, Hermes dared not delay. I render my homage. The grand serpent that encircles the central court, the earthly python that devours all spirits, the origin and end of all sins across the worlds. I am here to impudently call upon your saint, merely to thank you for the hand you've extended to me. For this, I am willing to offer you my most important possession. Speak. Above the altar, a black space-time vortex slightly trembled, and a towering voice like the sky echoed. Hearing this, Hermes stretched out his hand and handed over a crystal stone. Enclosed within it were his memories, concerning the shadow that obliterated worlds, and the collapse of the fantasy world. Of course, the great alchemist had tampered with it slightly. He excluded his own existence, disguising everything as findings after the binding and alchemy of the fates. Faking in front of a great divine power is indeed a terrifying act. Once discovered, it would almost certainly provoke thunderous fury. But if this was originally memory extracted from someone else, even if signs of editing were spotted, it seemed like there wouldn't be anything wrong. Moreover, Hermes believed that he had studied the memories of sentient beings for a long time. In this regard, he did have some experience. Furthermore, presently, the great alchemist had also utilized the authority of power. The goddess of Titans, the mother of the 9 muses, ancestor of memory and scripture, and another lover of Zeus. In such circumstances, unless he happened to encounter the true god who mastered memory of this world, there truly weren't many possibilities of being exposed. It's strange to say, in the fantasy world, gods that exist in the current era are mostly present. Even if there are occasional mishaps, they seem not to be very significant entities. Yet, as one of the 12 Titans, Mnemosyne in reality has not only not married Zeus but instead has vanished. Even in the records of history, there's never any content related to her as the goddess of memory. Hermes didn't know why, but he didn't encounter any special problems when summoning the goddess's projection. Therefore, the authority of memory should still exist in reality. As for where it is, well, he wouldn't just accidentally come across it anyway. Chapter 943 Memory. Passing through the rift in time and space, a crystal formed purely of memory plummeted from the mortal realm into the abyss. Watching the memory heralded by Hermes as the most important thing swirl into the rotating black hole, Lane couldn't help but feel curious by the side. First of all, he ruled out that the other party genuinely wanted to express gratitude for the help, hence offering up their deeply hidden secret. Then what else could it be about Hermes that would make him act voluntarily? What have you offered to our Lord? A piece of destiny. It comes from the memory of Lachesis, but whether it's true or false, only the mighty Lord of Hell can discern. His expression solemn and reverent, at this moment, Hermes appeared like a prophet more versed than the fates themselves. A piece of destiny? With a somewhat odd look, Lane gazed at Hermes before him, wanting to say something but ultimately kept silent. The memory of Lachesis, the thoughts of true gods aren't so easily swayed. Even for Lane himself, he often could only dilute things concerning his own essence, or strengthen and blur certain specific areas. As for reading a deity's thoughts like soul-searching, under the shelter of an immortal essence, the innate gods of chaos are not fooled by such tricks, let alone the very special fates. Had he never possessed the divine authority over memory, given the absolute power within one's own domain, Lane might still have reservations. But after trying it for himself, he could assert that without the support of an illogical force, no one could read the information in the mind of the fates. However, having said that, but observing Hermes, who seemed to have foreseen some major future events, after a moment of hesitation, Lane chose to remain silent. If it's not from the fates themselves, then the other party plans to project their own discovery onto destiny. To masquerade as a prophet spying on destiny. He himself had done many similar things in the past. He recalls back then, he was but a deity of meager divine power, and those listening to prophecies were incarnations of earth and masters of the sky, vastly beyond in stature. Yet, as the first deity of chaos to gain consciousness, even in his weakness, Lane needed no one else's name to vouch for his prophecy. By contrast, Hermes clearly lacked this ability. Perhaps feeling his own name wasn't credible enough, the great alchemist attributed this so-called fragment of destiny to Lachesis, attempting to make the audience believe the information he provided. His expression gradually returned to calm, and with that thought, Lane was in no hurry to learn the specifics. Once the great serpent has finished perusing, he would naturally find a way to know the content. He just hopes that Hermes didn't fabricate something too outrageous to present to him, or such brazen deception would at least require some response. Swoosh! The crystal shattered the air, leaping out from within the spinning dark mist. Almost at the same time, on the central floating island in the central court, the ancient serpent received this sacrifice from the mortal realm. Concurring with its own suspicions, the serpent of the central court didn't believe this to be true destiny. The memory of Lachesis cannot be read. It was likely, as it was in the past, a bold scam conceived on a whim by the audacious Hermes. What he sought to accomplish with this, but know thy enemy, and you shall never be defeated. His own past success depended on an understanding of destiny's trajectory and judgment of the all-gods' personalities. Yet Hermes made such a choice without basic understanding of himself. It seems the casting of the divine artifact has made him a bit too conceited. This is not good, but he himself would cure this ailment. SSS. Asmodeus, since you're here, let's watch it openly together. This is the mortal realm's believer offering me thanks. He claims it's from the memory of the fates, the true destiny. Heh, after you watch it, remember to take Poseidon back with you. He's too noisy. My place is not a prison for detainees. With a low chuckle, the great serpent flicked its tongue. Pupils spinning slightly, it looked toward a spot in the nearby void. And as the words fell, space trembled. The next moment, the figure of the Lord of the Nine Hells slowly emerged. All right. His gaze passing over the sea emperor bound atop the tree canopy. The black-haired, blood-eyed monarch nodded with a smile. He had been here for some time now, or rather, if the serpent of the central court hadn't suddenly started answering the prayers of its followers, he would have already taken Poseidon back to the bottom layer of hell. But now that there was an additional spectacle to behold, it would be no harm to wait a bit longer. A piece of destiny. What if this is true? Anything is possible. The Father God once did not believe you could glimpse the future. Stepping in front of the memory crystal, although Asmodeus was also somewhat skeptical that the true future could be obtained so easily, he still harbored a sliver of hope. To this, the ancient serpent neither agreed nor disagreed, and then reached out mentally to touch the crystal before it. The crystal, composed of memory, burst into flames. Invisible vapors rose from the fire, gradually covering the entire space. In the next moment, there was a dramatic shift between heaven and earth. Beside the towering canopy of Notahil, the incarnations of both the ancient serpent and the Lord of the Nine Hells entered the memory world. However, to Asmodeus's slight disappointment, there was nothing different here. It seemed just like Chaos's mortal realm. Chapter 944 Memory_2. It seems you are right. This so-called destiny amounts to nothing. Wait, what is that? Looking up at the sky, the Lord of Hell wore a solemn expression. In this world formed of memories, the boundless sky shattered with a thunderous crack. Thunder rose from the center of the earth, shooting towards the heavens. Yet everything halted before a sky-obscuring hand, like an ant trying to shake a tree, breaking into fragments scattered across the sky. As time ticked away, Asmodeus watched gravely. Until the world was on the brink of destruction, the heavens and earth faded into nothingness, and the entire memory segment came to an end. The surrounding images gradually faded away, leaving the Lord of the Nine Hells lost in thought. This is fake. He spoke lightly, not expecting that the memory Hermes offered would be this segment. However, the incarnated ancient serpent beside him was not at all flustered. It had not fully dismissed the possibility of such a scene occurring. Just as he said, it was fake, for there were many flaws within it. Yes, this is probably fake. There is no trace of the primordial gods, let alone you and me. However, the traces of law within this memory are not false. This is a scene that can only be seen from the perspective of a deity with powerful divine power. Nodding and then shaking his head, Asmodeus could not identify Lane from a mere hand, as when Hermes fled the fantasy world, Lane had not yet reclaimed its history with the annals of time. Based on the information revealed, the Lord of the Nine Hells drew a preliminary conclusion. This probably truly is the memory of the Fates, and though their divine power is not strong, perhaps the world's law they see is not as vague as that seen through powerful divine power. However, this destiny itself might be fake, or it could merely be the worst possibility, that chaos truly harbors such a destroyer, and this piece of destiny is a warning that the present world tries to convey to the all-gods through the mouth of the Fates. The ancient serpent agreed with a nod, making judgment in a few words. Hermes presenting this memory did indeed surprise it. The way it erased its own traces was clumsy, and it saw right through it. Was this an attempt to use it to find the identity of the destroyer? Seeing the serpent of the central court about to say something, in the next moment, the burning memory swelled once again. Invisible waves spread around, dissolving into a deathly silent emptiness of darkness. At a glance, no cornerstone of any material existence could be seen. This was the void outside of the world, recognized by the Lord of the Nine Hells. As the flow of time progressed in the memory space, even though there was no sensation of movement in the void, the memory itself gave the feeling of leaving the world. Far behind in the vast distance seemed to be chaos, while ahead in the darkness a point of light ascended. Asmodeus gazed into the distance, and vaguely, he thought he saw lights, large and small. They swirled like whirlpools, fractured yet converging, and they seemed so desolate. Is that worlds? He spoke haltingly, and as the position within the memory moved, finally, at a certain moment, the Lord of the Nine Hells saw the true nature of those points of light. Shattered earth and sky fell apart, the lingering will of a world crying out in despair. Subconsciously stepping forward, Asmodeus tried to see more clearly, but in the next moment, an overwhelming sense of fear swept over from all directions. Instantly, the memory space came to a halt, the darkness of the void faded away, and the dual suns shone beside him once again. Taking a deep breath, the Lord of the Nine Hells retracted his advancing step. He almost forgot that within the fragments of memory, regardless of his own strength, be it formidable or weak, or the distance he was from the event, what he could see, hear, and even the final onset of fear, were in fact all sensations belonging to the owner of the memory. He was just an observer, unable to change any outcome or delve into further secrets. However, in Asmodeus's view, the fact that a mortal believer could obtain such a secret from the Fates' memories was already a great achievement. This is a warning, a more direct one. The first memory fragment may be a pessimistic rehearsal of the future, while the second is more likely to be about the past or events currently unfolding. Although no presence was seen in the second memory, the outcome of connecting both memories was self-evident. The subtle power of otherworld law in the second memory was even more clear-cut. No one could fabricate a world cycle consistent with its own law. It must originate from a real otherworld. It's just that it is now destroyed, like Muspelheim, the kingdom of flames, integrated into the 9 realms of hell and the abyss. This entity is an apocalypse incarnate, a deity from an alien realm, and the sole great reason in the first memory was none other than Zeus. It seems the cause has been found. It is the current world law, borrowing the hand of the Fates, attempting to issue a warning to the divine king through prophecy. The more he thought, the more it seemed so. While standing aside, the incarnation of the ancient serpent remained silent. He guessed the beginning but not the end. How Hermes managed to glimpse Heminu was something it still didn't quite understand. Could it be that Hermes did not deceive it, and this was indeed a prophecy he obtained from the Fates? Perhaps the process through which he acquired it wasn't easy to illustrate, which is why he presented it differently. Fortunately, after the separation of the divine from the human, whether in terms of temperament or some more essential traits, a subtle difference arose. Plus, Asmodeus had not witnessed the full display of spirit realm strength, which is why he failed to identify the source causing the shattering of the world. Of course, there's also the fact that the divine presence didn't appear at all in this fragment of memory. It's uncertain whether Hermes actually saw, or with his means, simply couldn't perceive the divine in its true form. Your believer deserves to be commended. It is the reward he is due. If there really is a destroyer casting its gaze upon the chaos world, then no one can remain uninvolved. Speaking solemnly, admiration shone in the eyes of Asmodeus. He didn't know how the serpent of the Central Court's believer had acquired the so-called fate, but it probably had something to do with Lane. Before the spirit realm was opened, Lane was already dealing with fate. Thus, it wasn't surprising that currently, under his aid, the believer's avatar was covertly targeting the Fates. However, the Lord of Hell is clear about rewards and punishments. Even though this isn't his believer, since the information the other party had acquired was useful to him, he ought to provide a reward. Thinking this, Asmodeus looked toward the great serpent. Until now, he still did not know who this meritorious individual was. You are right. This is indeed very crucial information, and he indeed deserves commendation. But as for exactly what reward to give him, I still need to think it over so as not to neglect the meritorious one. The great serpent spoke, but for some reason, Asmodeus felt that the other party did not seem as pleased as he should be. Perhaps it was a misperception, or maybe it was regret that his own believer didn't have the strength to see the true visage of the destroyer. Such demanding requirements are typical of him. Asmodeus's gaze swept over the central court, where there were hardly any signs of life. Apart from this divine tree, which even the Lord of the 9 Hells greatly envied, only beings with the power at the level of a deity were qualified to enter here, to face the second king of hell. It's not intentional discrimination against anyone. It's an equal disdain for all life forms, truly befitting the embodiment of malevolence, but sometimes setting standards too high is unnecessary. The believer has already done well enough. As for further probing into the secrets of the destroyer, that should be their own concern. Chapter 945. Reward and Arrival. Although not perfect, he has done quite well. I don't understand your followers, nor do I know what he wants. Luckily, Mephisto is also in the mortal realm. Let him take a trip. It seems that humans themselves understand their own desires best. But speaking of which, what do you think about this destroyer? Decisively, as he mulled over what to use as a reward, Asmodeus offered his idea. Although it's still just a vague prophecy, the alien destroyer might not be able to annihilate chaos. Moreover, even if it arrives, the first to be befallen will not be the abyss at the bottom of the world, but the divine king who governs the present world. But no matter what, it's always good to make some preparations in advance. The 9 hells do not belong to the current realm's control, but that does not mean it has the ability to survive independently after the world's destruction. Upon reading that part about fate, Asmodeus also felt a sense of urgency rising within him. Time is of the essence, and even though everything is progressing smoothly and the 9 hells are constantly growing stronger, the necessary preparations still cannot be neglected. After all, without foresight, there is immediate worry. Waiting until trouble knocks on the door to think of a solution is not his style. Regarding this matter, we think it's better to make a long-term plan. The ancient serpent moved his lips slightly and said quietly, "You know, this is a major issue and not something that can be decided lightly. Speaking of which, have you noticed that since the establishment of the 9 hells, though we have plundered much of Tartarus' power, it seems not only has he not weakened but has become even stronger. Compared to the beginning, his stature has not decreased at all, and there's even a subtle hint of improvement. If we combine the likewise greatly strengthened 9 hells with him, it might even have reached the peak of great divine power." Silently, regarding the plans of the Lord of the 9 hells, the serpent of the central court found it difficult to refuse. But there was really nothing he could do about this issue, so the ancient serpent simply changed the topic. If it were any other matter, probably Asmodeus would not care. But he could not ignore matters related to the abyss. "Ah? You mean?" Indeed, seeing the great serpent mention Tartarus, the Lord of the 9 hells was immediately captivated. Indeed, he had also noticed the changes in the abyss before. Over the years, from the establishment of hell to now, the 9 hells' absorption of the abyss power was definitely not small. However, from the senses of Asmodeus using the power of boundaries, Tartarus showed no signs of wilting but, over time, became even stronger. Layers upon layers of realms were being born within him, countless creatures appearing out of nowhere. Even with the constant slaughtering in the Azura field day and night, compared to the rate at which the abyss was strengthening, it still seemed as minor as a drop in a bucket. To this day, even he was not clear how many layers of realms had been born within the abyss, how many different species of life had been nurtured. In any case, every once in a while, there would always be some new entities among the demons charging at Hell's defenses from the Azura field. Lord of the 9 hells once thought it was an illusion of his own. He had previously failed to glimpse the true power of the least personified of the primordial deities. Now as he grew, he slowly became aware. But now that the serpent of the central court suddenly brought up this matter, it undoubtedly proved that this is reality. Lane, with his inherent vision, should be able to see the true power of Tartarus, spawning another line of thought in his mind. Muspelheim, Kingdom of Flames, Blood Mother Tree, the subterranean space, and the source power mobilized by Zeus. He listed them one by one. Although Asmodeus had noticed them before, he did not think of them in this way. However, with the awakening from the great serpent, he seemed to suddenly understand a lot. Previously, when the 9 realms merged, Hell and Tartarus together divided the power of the Flame Kingdom, and even among the 6 original demons in the abyss, one's power corresponded to them. The Lord of the 9 hells always thought this was an unreplicable accident, but now it seems not so. Including the Blood Mother Tree, all these are products of an alien realm, captured from the void by the power of chaos, and ultimately becoming part of his body. Among these forces, there are those that are complete, such as Vanaheim. There are those that were complete but ultimately shattered, like Muspelheim. There are also those that no longer exist in the form of a realm, becoming an extra part of the world, such as the cavities mixed in the surface and underground. But beyond these parts easily hosted by chaos, there are many more that he has difficulty digesting quickly. These are the parts that do not match his laws and order, and to assimilate them requires enough time. Just like flames, in different worlds, often have different manifestations. Although the main body might be similar in the nuances, there could even be contradictions and conflicts. In such cases, one can only gradually remove the differences, and in the cycle of the world, break down their special characteristics, transforming them into the most primordial power. However, this takes far too long, so long that it cannot be accomplished even in an era. Hence, they ultimately end up like the residual waste at the beginning of creation, their structures broken, injected into the outworld black hole, the bottomless Tartarus. These chaotic and contradictory forces wildly expand the mass of the abyss, which doesn't need to consider its persona like other primordial gods, for he has no persona. He also doesn't need to consider internal stability, because he is inherently unstable. Countless source powers gave birth to countless facets, each possessing its own twisted and unique order and rules, and equally twisted life forms. They wage war against each other or against hell. They destroy each other or self-destruct. In this vibration of creation and destruction, they ultimately digest these foreign bodies in the most violent ways, which is why Tartarus is growing increasingly powerful. The Blood Mother Tree attempts to assimilate all things, but its tendrils have not yet reached into the dirtiest depths of the abyss, not without these factors influencing. After all, even in his eyes, Tartarus is quite a troublesome existence. So you mean to say, the abyss is still strengthening, and its growth is hastening. But this is just the surface. Behind it, it represents that chaos is still continually devouring existences from beyond, then incorporating them into his body, enhancing his power. Even because there are too many powers from beyond that urgently need to be resolved, he doesn't have the time to digest these minor details, thereby indiscriminately sending them into the abyss. Thus, the so-called memory of the fates also has another possibility. That is, he is indeed warning the Divine King, but not because he fears being destroyed by the destroyer. Actually, if chaos truly sensed danger, his reaction would never be so sluggish. Just like you once were, the entire world sensed the disturbance when you opened the spirit realm. Since chaos has not done so, it means there actually is another reason. Asmodeus's crimson pupils flickered slightly, feeling he was closer to the truth. He wants to warn Zeus, just wishing him to exercise more of the responsibilities of a divine king, regulate the current cycle of the world, and thereby speed up his consumption of the alien realm. Just by some fluke, the fates not only failed to accomplish their mission, but were intercepted by your followers. Atop the crown of Nodahill, the serpent of the central court had been listening indifferently at first. It mentioned the changes in the abyss merely to divert attention, without giving it much thought. However, as Asmodeus gradually analyzed, the ancient serpent's expression became increasingly solemn. Thinking about it this way, it indeed seemed quite reasonable. It had been wondering how Hermes had managed to see the remnants of Heminu. But considering this angle, facing the vast primordial water and boundless darkness, chaos might indeed have had some trouble digesting. Yes, that is exactly what I meant. The serpent of the central court spoke calmly, acknowledging Asmodeus's conjecture. Yes, that was indeed what it thought. So, things are not as bad as you think. Compared to the destroyer, that even chaos does not take very seriously, what is more worrying is the increasing strength of Tartarus. Especially recently, it seems that a special, powerful demon has been born in the abyss, which not only possesses strength comparable to other demon gods, but also has a more stable intelligence. It calls itself the Demon Prince, a descendant of the king, destined to crush hell and unify the abyss. Although its boast is currently just a joke, given the current scale of the abyss, who knows whether it might become the second mother of demons, favored by the will of Tartarus. Maybe Asmodeus had really guessed it correctly, but regardless of whether he was right or not, the ancient serpent subtly shifted the topic. It would verify the truth. However, as the Lord of Hell, it would do best to focus on developing hell, striving to rapidly excel on the path of great divine power, surpassing both your Father God and Son. As for matters of destruction, it would be wiser to care less about them. Mortal realm, at the heart of the eastern lands. Dusk was approaching, casting its glow on the majestic royal city. Through the towering city walls, the huge silhouettes of two figures could be vaguely seen at the center of the city. The evening sun bathed these figures in a golden hue. A tricolored light reflected from the chest of one of the figures, illuminating the 3 city gates. These were the statues of the divine king and the heavenly empress, with the tricolored light coming from the gemstone on Zeus's scepter. Devout believers of the city had constructed these enormous bronze statues to gain the favor of the deity from Mount Olympus. They indeed got their wishes, as this became the city closest to Mount of the Gods. Here lies Olympia, standing on its battlements. One could vaguely see Olympus through the 9 layers of clouds. On the grand avenue in the center of the city, devotees were seen kneeling and praying in the direction of Mount of the Gods. Although not the strongest kingdom nor the most prosperous city, no country daring to worship all gods had ever dared to attack here. The decrees of all gods were often issued from here, and the temples of the 12 main gods could be traced here as well. Down the main road leading directly to the city gate came the dull sound of horse hooves, growing louder. Before the sun had set completely, a centaur finally arrived at the city. Donned in ceremonial attire, Chiron looked up. The mountain, the colossal statues, and the city wall united from this angle, each more immense than the last, like 3 shadows weighing down on all life forms. With a somewhat melancholic expression, the centaur didn't know what he would encounter. He was here to declare war, though not officially, but practically that was the case. In Silver Moon City, when he received the task to challenge Olympia's countries and even the deity, he knew this would be the outcome. As an envoy, bearing such a provocative mission, no one could ensure his safe return. After all, as a long-living demigod and not an immortal true god, he doesn't age, but he can die. But it does not matter. Shaking his head, Chiron did not know that in another timeline, he would willingly exchange his life for Prometheus's freedom from the Caucasus dungeons. He just knew that he didn't care much about life and death. Long ago, shortly after he first encountered witchcraft, he had asked Hecate for a prophecy, and the goddess of the magic net granted his request. On a crystal ball made from an ancient star core, the mists of fate gradually cleared away. Under the starry sky reflected by the stars, Chiron saw his own future. The prophecy told him that he would face a life and death decision because of a demigod. Now thinking about it, perhaps it referred to Achilles. Both were bound by fate and met predetermined deadly trials. However, unlike him, who boldly chose to directly confront fate and seemed to return to the confines of destiny, he chose to face it calmly, so the centaur came here. Clash, clash. A sound of armor clashing with weapons began to echo, and as he approached the city gate, the large figure of the centaur immediately attracted a lot of attention. A group of city-guarding soldiers cautiously approached, but from their attire, they looked more like church guards.
Halt!
Who are you, and what brings you to Olympia? A sharp call, observing the centaur twice as tall as himself, the captain of the soldiers seemed apprehensive. But touching the sacred badge on his chest, his expression became spirited again. I am Chiron, as you can see, also a centaur. Don't be nervous, young man. I mean you no harm. Speaking calmly, Chiron explained. As for my purpose here, just as an envoy from Silver Moon City, I bring the Bishop Council's will to convey the Church's inquiry to the rulers of this city. Chapter 946. Facing the Charges. Passing through the main road of the city, directly towards the royal palace in the center of the city. The humans on both sides cast various looks, with curiosity and inquiry, but more of fear and exclusion. In this kingdom closest to Olympus, people have never seen a centaur. Naturally, Chiron has long been accustomed to such gazes. Whether it be deities or humans, they are never that enthusiastic about beings different from themselves. Xenophobia is common everywhere. Traveling all the way, only stopping at the royal palace of Olympia, did the centaur halt. The royal palace was not magnificent. It was situated before a grand temple, with tall bronze statues standing behind it. From a distance, the presence of the royal palace appeared as though it was meant to set off the splendor of the temple. And those 2 colossal bronze statues seemed to trample them underfoot. Centaur, His Majesty has summoned you. After a short wait, Chiron was approached by a guard returning from delivering a message. However, the guard looked at him differently from before, the previous vigilance gone. replaced with a mix of admiration and disgust, like seeing a gemstone covered in filth, wanting to pick it up but afraid of dirtying one's hands. His steps faltering slightly, Chiron shook his head silently. He knew why. Striding forward, under the watchful eyes of the guards on both sides, the centaur slightly bowed his head, avoiding the not-so-tall main entrance and walking into the royal palace. The main hall was somewhat spacious. Chiron puffed out his chest. At the end of the staircase, directly opposite the main entrance, the king of Olympia was seated on his throne. The king's subjects lined up on both sides, with a variety of looks pouring in, among them a few godhood practitioners with different auras. There were 2 seats by the king's side at the same level, but they were empty at the moment. None were for the queen, none at all. But before Chiron could look closer, an elderly man dressed lavishly stepped forth from the left side of the hall. "Halt! Envoy from the eastern lands, are you the centaur Chiron?" "I am." Chiron nodded slightly, his tone calm. "This time my coming. Of course, I've long heard of your reputation. I have heard of you. The notable centaur sage, who has left his name in the legends of not just one hero. I most certainly know you, Chiron." The elder interrupted with fiery eyes. Though his words said he had long heard of him, his manner of speaking didn't seem courteous at all. "You introduced yourself, now I shall introduce myself. Listen well. I am the younger brother of the former king, and I have once administered the affairs of the imperial capital. Over the past 200 years, I have personally witnessed the succession of 5 kings. I can name the bloodline and ancestors of every person present and recount the noble deeds they have performed for all gods. But Centaur, I stand here today not for these reasons, but because I am one of the most devout believers of the heavenly Empress. This is Olympia, only true believers have the standing to be here. Worldly status is inconsequential before faith, so what about you, Centaur? What identity brings you here, to this dwelling place of the servants of all gods, under Mount Olympus blessed by the sacred, to the kingdom? As a pupil and attendant by the side of the respected goddess of the magic net, the bow-bearing servant of the daughter of the divine king, the wilderness goddess? If so, you would be the most honored guest in Olympia. From the king down to the beasts by the roadside, every person in the kingdom will respect you, proud to meet with you. So, Centaur, please tell me yourself. Who are you and why have you come here to meet with the king of Olympia?" With a light sigh, following the elder's words, Chiron clearly saw the sharpness and anticipation contained in the surrounding scrutinizing gazes. He had known he would face this situation, contradicting yet fervent. Unlike Silver Moon City, perhaps because the faith of Silver Moon City does not often respond to them, or perhaps because the deity they worship does not like such extreme devotion. Hence in that place Chiron had rarely seen such a scene. But in Olympia, the royal city closest to Mount Olympus, this is a place that absolutely venerates the gods. Any existence associated with God, their status cannot even compare to that of the king. Or it could be said that the king of Olympia has little significance of his own. He is merely the secular steward of the kingdom. So Chiron knew, even though he had already conveyed his purpose through the guard, as long as he changed his statement at this moment, they would still regard him as the most honored guest. As for the prior mistake, that message-carrying guard would be executed for failing to understand his intentions, the centaur can do no wrong. Yet the most laughable part is, including the soldier himself, they all hope this becomes reality. Yes, if through his death he could make this misguided divine envoy realize his mistake, then the soldier would willingly accept death, even thinking it an honor. He would feel his death was sacred and meaningful, even though it was essentially paying for someone else's mistake. This is probably why Teacher has been unwilling to associate with the deity race from the start. Such humans have already lost the significance of existing in the world as individuals. The only thing they desire is to be with their God, whom they worship. Unable to judge, Chiron cannot understand them, but his visit is not to understand them. So facing the various gazes, the centaur only shook his head in the end. Chapter 947. Facing the charges _2. The believers of the heavenly Empress, the King of Olympia. Although I have already informed you of my purpose, since you are unclear, I shall repeat it once more. This visit here, with the will of the Bishop Council of Silver Moon City, I have come to convey their inquisition. Achilles' reckless misuse of the divine artifact is undoubtedly a sin, but who gave you the authority to judge his crimes privately? If it's the divine sword of the Lord you hold, then only the Lords can judge him. Therefore, for your presumption, you must pay the price. How dare you? Bang! The desk was overturned, and an armored general stood up with an enraged glare at Chiron. His right hand was already on the long sword at his waist, as if ready to draw and kill at a word of disagreement. Chiron, that madman has offended the deities and has been personally executed by all gods. Besides, what need do gods have for credentials to judge a mere human? What? Do those mad heretics not only aim their swords at us but now also delude themselves to be enemies with all gods? Ignoring the general's words at this moment, the centaur already felt a certain gaze upon him. Clearly, his arrival might have caught the attention of some deity. At the foot of Mount Olympus, any deity might appear here. However, Chiron only paused for a moment, before he continued with his unfinished proclamation. Whether in the mortal realm or the Holy Land, on earth or in the fake god's divine kingdom, all who err must repent. The supreme and omniscient Lord is strict but also merciful. He does not punish the fool for not knowing his greatness, nor does he chastise the ignorant for their offense. However, those who overstep and offend the Lord's radiance shall provoke the righteous who are favored by him to anger, causing strife and conflict in the mortal realm. Regardless of what the heretics call human divine beings, all are included. Boom! Before he could finish his words, a crescent-like dazzling arc of a sword swung towards Chiron. Seeing this, the centaur had to pause temporarily, prepared to meet the coming foe. He knew it would come to this. After all, Silver Moon City's demands were targeted both at the kingdoms of the mortal world and the fake gods. The former they tolerated and listened to, the latter they would not hear to the end no matter what. And his own danger was actually here. The person acting against him was nothing. Chiron could resolve him with ease. In fact, were it not for the people in this royal palace, if he wished to leave, no one could stop him. But this was Olympia, the closest human kingdom to Mount of the Gods. Just as the city of Athens hung Aegis's shield, to Chiron's knowledge, Olympia's safety was also ensured by a divine artifact. Should they decide to take action, then he would undoubtedly fail. However, even in defeat, the humans of Olympia would not kill him. After all, Chiron was related to the deities, so it wasn't up to them to decide his life or death. Only when the one from Mount Olympus arrived would they be qualified to determine his fate. Of course, Chiron was already mentally prepared, and he did not fear death. If that day were to come, he would merely accept it graciously. Sasa. The soles of her shoes rustled over the dry, yellow leaves. At the outskirts of Olympia, the woman walked by, observing the farmland along the road. As the human kingdom closest to Mount Olympus, the land of Olympia is fertile and bountiful. Minerals abound here, and the black soil easily yields 3 harvests a year. But compared to the abundant natural environment, the people living here showed no signs of surplus in their lives. In just a short journey of a dozen miles or so, she saw over 100 farmers in tattered clothes and emaciated figures. The woman knew the reason. This was not something the gods deliberately caused, for the human grain meant nothing to them. They only need mortal faith, not their material goods. But ever since a debate in Athens, the tale of the downfall of the Bronze Age began to spread in the mortal realm again. In other places, this might only be regarded as a caution or a topic of conversation after dinner, but here people saw the connection between faith and sacrifice. From that day on, the offerings of the people of Olympia became increasingly lavish. It started as voluntary, but it even evolved into a unique phenomenon. The poor offered up everything they had, then accused their neighbors of not being pious enough for not offering everything. The bankrupt merchant offered up all his assets, then accused his competitors of not having enough devout faith. And so, gradually, sacrifice became a means of attacking others, although the gods never asked for these. The once prosperous life declined, and the diligent became idle. Various negative emotions gathered together, even darkening the sacred fire in the city. It was this that caught her attention, noticing this subtle change. Is that the centaur who used to follow Hecate? Walking further, the woman looked up slightly. She looked towards the direction of the city while the distance was great. Every word Chiron said was clear to hear. A demigod bringing some mortal will to settle scores with the so-called wrongs of the gods, if considered on its own, was quite amusing. Although she wouldn't laugh, she would just see this as another Tantalus. However, after listening to everything Chiron had to say, she became serious. At this moment, a long-lost memory surged into her mind. That was when they had just won a victory but suffered a great loss in another space. Zeus, what exactly are you thinking? From the end of the Golden Apples feast, Hestia had already felt something was not right, and the visit of the Lord of Darkness to Mount of the Gods exacerbated this premonition, making the goddess of Hrothfire increasingly uneasy. That day, when the Leviathan sword slipped from Achilles' hand and fell at the peak of Mount Olympus, Hestia had gone to find her brother, asking him to return the artifact to the spirit realm or simply go with the flow and let the Lord of Darkness take it away. At the very least, it should be reclaimed. But Zeus refused her, instead, letting the sword be planted at the base of Mount Olympus, as if silently flaunting his martial prowess. Ah! With a soft sigh, divine light surged, and the goddess casually sent an oracle into the temple in the city, instructing the humans in the city to bring Chiron back to her temple, isolating him from contact with others. After one last look at the land behind her, she took to the air. Hestia headed towards Mount Olympus. Chapter 948. Underground. Passing through 9 layers of clouds, stepping upon the sea of clouds below. It wasn't long before Mount Olympus was within sight. Lifted by a blaze of fire, Hestia passed over the layered and varied-colored palaces, heading straight to the gates of the Golden Palace at the mountain's summit. The palace of the Divine King, as solemn and majestic as ever, bathed its sacred brilliance all around. Much to the goddess's surprise, however, the doors to the divine palace were sealed shut, and she felt no trace of Zeus's presence. Where is the Divine King? Where has he gone? Zeus was evidently not here. Her mind swept across Mount Olympus from top to bottom, but still Hestia found no sign of him. With a slight frown, the goddess of Hrothfire had no choice but to address the 2 guards stationed at the gate, who might as well have been part of the decor. If she wasn't mistaken, her brother was likely out seeking pleasure again. With her lips pursed tightly, Hestia didn't know what to say about him. After all, if Hera's status as the marriage guardian were to be ignored, it was merely one of Zeus's personal preferences. Hestia had prepared herself for the lack of a satisfactory answer, but to her surprise, the 2 guards unexpectedly had a response for her. Your Highness, not long ago, His Majesty returned to Mount Olympus from the underworld. After summoning both the goddess of life and the god of craftsmanship, he swiftly departed. Before leaving, His Majesty instructed that he would soon make an important announcement, and all deities willing to obey him should gather. However, since Your Highness was not on Mount Olympus at the time, we were entrusted with the duty to relay his message. Additionally, apart from you, the gods from the underworld and the vast ocean were also among those invited. Since the wind gods were absent, the task of delivering the message was personally carried out by Iris, the servant of the Heavenly Empress. An important announcement? Upon hearing this, Hestia was momentarily taken aback, as she hadn't expected such a result. Filled with curiosity but refraining from asking further, she knew these 2 attendants were merely conveying Zeus's will and most likely unaware of the specific details. What matter could be so significant as to warrant such an elaborate summons from Zeus, even calling back his brothers whom he barely tolerated? With a slightly eased expression, Hestia was oblivious that her other brother had already returned to the side of the Father God. The goddess felt that Zeus had at least done something commendable this time, remembering his distant brother when it came time to announce a major event. It was good to gather, Ever since the three brothers had parted ways, there had scarcely been occasions to be together. Given a chance, she would also like to hear about their lives in the vast seas and the underworld. A place like the underworld seemed so desolate and isolated. Indeed. Very well, I understand. Continue to guard this place. With a slight nod of acknowledgement, she turned and left. Since Zeus wasn't there was no need for the goddess of Heathfire to linger any longer. Mortal affairs, though important, were not urgent. After all, even though the Olympian gods were now more aware of the passage of time than the Titans' deities of old, they still did not regard such fleeting moments with much concern. Just like the disturbances above the vast seas that seemed obvious to some, to the gods of the earth hardly anyone took notice. At most, they perceived the abnormal turmoil of the East Sea, but none would have thought that the immortal deity, the sea emperor anointed by the divine court, would have departed the mortal realm. In their eyes, Poseidon was likely merely involved in another debacle and was now probably recuperating in his own domain. After all, the affairs of the ocean had always been managed by the ancient sea gods. With or without Poseidon, it didn't seem that important. If in this era Mount Olympus could be considered the heart of the East, then the entire land of the East might well be regarded as the center of the mortal world. Despite thousands of years of human development, humanity has only occupied the vast land east of Mount Olympus, with much of the rest of the world still wild and untamed. Ever since the fall of Typhon, countless demons have scattered across the earth. Indelible evil creatures have spread wildly. The roadside weeds, the birds and beasts by the mountains, or even a clump of soil, a stone, they could all be influenced by that once fleeting and strange sunlight that shone upon the mortal realm, becoming entirely different from their former selves. Even after several attempts at eradication by the all-gods, they ultimately had no success. The evil creatures were relentless and seemingly impossible to annihilate. Provided a spark remained, it might well ignite into flames again after a long while. Thus, the all-gods had no option but to let go of the trivial, turning a blind eye to most of the lesser evil creatures. As a result, evil gods who accidentally acquired divinity, criminals who were banished from human kingdoms, and even some intelligent life forms different from humans. Many of these beings rejected by all countries and deities have mostly migrated here to continue their existence through a primitive way of life. And the all-gods, for their part, had to abandon their pursuit of them. After all, in a mortal world where the true majesty of a true god could not be shown, purging the entire mortal world would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. As long as the core of humanity remained in their grasp, there was no need to thoroughly exterminate these outcasts. And today, to the west of Mount Olympus, beyond endless mountains and rivers, near a secluded stream, a group of strange yet beautiful beings emerged one by one from a dark, cavernous opening. Chapter 949, Underground_2. The profound cave seemed bottomless, as if directly leading to the heart core of the earth. Carefully feeling their way out, although it appeared not to be their first time to the surface, their behavior clearly showed a deep wariness of the mortal realm. Tap, tap. Their movements were uniform, striving to avoid making any unnecessary noise. Skillfully bypassing ordinary-looking bushes and tree stumps, their eyes inadvertently checking the traps they had laid during their last visit. After patrolling around an area thousands of steps in diameter, none of the traps appeared to have been triggered. It was hard to say whether this was good or bad. The group returned to their starting position, the lead creature's eyes flashing with a hint of regret. Yet there was also a sense of relief in their heart. They had come for a hunt, but the results of hunting were often accompanied by the crises of life and death. Even though her loyalty to Mother was unquestionable, having witnessed a dreadful scene, she knew well that not all deaths were the same. Being killed by prey was different. Those corrupt and evil lives would not allow the dead to rest in peace. Not being able to return to nature after death, that was the real source of her fear. Continue forward. Direction, due north. The leader spoke, a pleasant voice not belonging to humans emanating from her lips. Seeing nothing amiss, her companions also breathed a sigh of relief, ready to continue their unfinished tasks. Every time they came to the surface, they would expand their exploration range and set up new traps. Until one day when they would capture enough prey or attract a being beyond their imagination, then declare this exit as a restricted area with their deaths. Thus, repeating the cycle again and again. Except for a few very stable passages, even those leading directly to the underworld, most pathways to the surface were sometimes stable and sometimes broken. With what they called the breath of Mother Earth, new fractures would always emerge. Thus, for them, as long as they wished, they would never lack portals to the surface. After a brief rest, the group carefully continued to probe their surroundings. Following the river upstream, they advanced. Upon reaching the edge of their previous exploration, a mere couple of hundred steps took them almost half a day. Until sunset approached, the leader glanced at the sky, preparing to return with a mix of regret and relief. Another day returned without success, but most of their time was indeed spent this way. All right, let's stop here for today, and we'll continue the next time. Prepare, rear guard to front guard, retreat in order, remember to be careful. Wait! The voice that was usually subdued suddenly became urgent, followed by a sudden raising of the hand. At the leader's signal, the group immediately halted. Due to their positions, those at the back couldn't see beyond the first person's line of sight, nor did they know what she saw. But under her urgent command, the whole team's movements were neat and regulated. In an instant, the entire forest was left with only the sound of rapid breathing and the rustling of leaves in the wind, with only the leader continuing to closely observe her discovery. Across the small river, 2,000 steps away, several green caterpillars chewed on fallen leaves, and some were spitting out fine white threads, weaving cocoons for their transformation. The creatures and nature peacefully coexisted, seemingly indistinguishable from any other place. However, such an ordinary scene in the eyes of the leader was not so ordinary. A hint of dread and excitement flickered in her dark pupils. There, a faint red line subtly twisted around a green caterpillar, looking like a natural pattern and nothing out of the ordinary. If any human were here, they would probably assume it was just tree resin, or a random mutation in the caterpillar. But for the captain, who had encountered the prey more than once, she knew all too well what it was. It represented their chance as well as a natural disaster for the area. Recorder. Record. Crack number August 3rd, 7251. Today a life carrying a corruption trace was found. The source of the corruption is unknown, but preliminary estimates indicate it should not exceed a high-level evil creature. It's huntable, then to be sacrificed to the Great Mother, and after returning, request support. Now, continue my previous command. Rear guard to front guard. Let's carefully retreat. No response, but the entire team uniformly turned and retreated. As cautious as on their way here, not stirring any noise. Until they returned inside the pitch-black cave entrance, no further accidents occurred. Standing at the cave entrance, the leader took one last look at the riverside thicket, knowing that the next time she came here, there might no longer be any living creatures. When a region showed signs of corruption, soon everything here would be contaminated. They are the tentacles of the mother of flesh, tainting the divine authority of life in that foul manner. Only the great Mother Earth could save all this, and they were nature's most steadfast defenders. Sasa. Her figure disappeared at the entrance of the cave, and the forest once again fell into silence. Thousands of steps away from the cave entrance by the river, the special green caterpillar continued to feed on leaves, with only the unspoken trees witnessing everything that happened. Chapter 950 Underground_3. After a long while, when the sun sets and all things return to the embrace of night, the lives upon the earth sink one by one into slumber. Beneath the profound darkness, a calm voice suddenly arises from the forest. How is it? You've seen for yourself. They should meet your requirements. Aren't they quite indistinguishable from humans? The voice startles a flock of birds, and in the next moment, as if they had been there all along, two figures silently emerge midair. Glancing at the entrance to the underground not far away, Zeus does not hide his admiration. Indeed, not bad. Their prowess has even surpassed over 99% of humans. Their strength may not be formidable, but that is due to the lack of divine blood running through them. However, sometimes this very weakness is precisely what I need. I had no idea you also had such accomplishments in the realm of creation. Elves, or more specifically, dark elves. Once created by the hand of the goddess of life herself, by the Lord of Darkness. In the mortal realm, underground realm of chaos, they have already been active for a very long time. It was only recently that Zeus began to notice their existence. And just upon seeing them, he could not help but marvel. Never having gone through the evolution of the 3 generations of humans or having wielded the dominion over life, the Lord of Darkness somehow managed to create this independently evolving race capable of providing faith. By contrast, Zeus himself had made more than one attempt in secrecy, but the life he managed to create was either a subspecies of humans unable to break free from restrictions or beings like the Golden Generation that couldn't provide sufficient faith. Most of the time, the spirit realm cycle of samsara didn't even recognize them as a separate life form, utterly withholding souls from them. Having tasted failure, Zeus knew just how difficult this was. The deity race upon Earth went through 4 generations before humans as they are known today came into existence. And yet Erebus merely extended a slight effort and created such a perfect species. Even if it were not for the fact that these elves had their own creator and their relatively scarce numbers, it is likely that the elves would have had the capacity to supplant humans. For a time, the previously somewhat inflated heart of the divine king settles down once more. Leveraging the power of the fruit of one day to inherit the bulk of the strength from the king of all monsters, Zeus thought he was progressively closing the gap with these primordial deities. But now it seems he still has a long way to go. It was just a casual creation, not worth mentioning. Actually, I've never been concerned with their well-being. He speaks lightly, tentatively acknowledging this fact. However, Erebus certainly doesn't intend to explain the fact that he obtained the corpses of alien elves and dwarves from the dark and underground realm of Svartalfheim and easily created life from this basis. After all, he did make localized modifications to make them more in line with the aesthetics of the Chaos deity race. So from this perspective, to say that these were his creations isn't entirely incorrect. All right, Zeus, speak of your reasons. I remember you were not as eager about the abyss before. What happened? Have you suffered a setback at sea and now seek to regain ground? A mere projection of power, you shouldn't be unable to handle it. Is such a trifle really worth coming to see me? His gaze remains calm and indifferent. The Lord of Darkness's look sweeps over the divine king and eventually rests on the entrance that leads straight to the underground, as though seeing through to the underworld behind it. In his conversation, he seems uninterested in Zeus' prior proposition. But only he himself knows that at this very moment, he too is quite eager. Not long ago, Zeus' avatar had made his way into the underworld, solely to pursue the god of sleep, but ultimately stopped at the edge of the domain of eternal night. He questioned the 3-headed demon dog about what had transpired here, then left behind his own methods. However, from start to finish, he seemed to have forgotten that there was a third witness present. The domain of eternal night and lightlessness envelopes the underworld, circling the entire fabric of time. Thus, what happened at the entrance, Erebus likewise watched. But unlike Zeus' various speculations about Nyx, Erebus was not at all surprised that Hypnos could enter the realm of eternal night. Countless eons ago, he had witnessed Hypnos emerge from it, and now returning, there was nothing unusual. And while Nyx probably had never paid any heed to him, just like she had never cared for the creatures born from the power of eternal night to become deities of the underworld, Erebus might not care about the existence of Hypnos, but that doesn't mean he's indifferent to other matters. That day, as the observing Lord of Darkness suddenly remembered, although he had been keeping an eye on Lane, there seemed to be something he had overlooked. He recalled that the first time he confronted Lane, which was during the transition of the Second Epoch, he traced the power within the souls of the Silver humanity to discover the birth of an interface within the abyss. Being a primordial deity himself, Erebus was well aware of how chaotic Tartarus's chronology could be. Countless years in the outside world have passed, and within, an unknown stretch of time has elapsed. The question then arose, What has become of the interfaces within the abyss after such a prolonged time? What changes have occurred within Tartarus, and what difficulties might it have encountered? One who does not plan for the eternal future cannot plan for a single moment. The Lord of Darkness did not know, but he undoubtedly wished to. Hence, even if Zeus had not sought him out, perhaps he himself would have found a pretext to pique the other's interest soon after. With the current god-king taking the forefront, his own targets would undoubtedly be much smaller.